From all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in the South. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. We'll go ahead and open the phones. We don't have as many guests booked today, so we might have some time for some calls. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send us a text to the same number and leave us a written note at tvlr.fm/contact. Happy 4th of July, folks. It is America's 250th birthday. Hope everybody's having a good time. I was at a concert last night. I had a good time. I was in Birmingham listening to Maylene and the Sons of Disaster, one of my favorite bands from high school. Enjoyed it. Got some new merch from the band. Unfortunately, I did, Adam, see some merch that I had to object to as a unionist. Maylene and the Sons of Disaster is a southern metal band, and so, you know, it's all like super high energy, and, you know, I mean, you know, it's metal, but they're like, everybody's from Alabama, and so there's like southern stuff in it too. Unfortunately, one of their hats said that their music is music to commit OSHA violations to. Oh, wow. Which is funny, I guess. Funny. It's funny. It's a good bit, but that's not metal. It's not metal. It's not cool. It's not rebellious to commit OSHA violations. Actually, that's lame and boss propaganda.
That's right. What is really metal is to bust your boss for OSHA violations.
Yes, exactly. Filing a complaint against your boss for an OSHA violation with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration of our government. That's metal, that's rebellious, that's cool, and it's lame, actually. Can you imagine, you know, I mean, like, it's one thing to, you know, you're at a metal concert and you're being, like, you know, your inhibitions are lowered, you're in the mosh pit, you're, you know, running around and, you know, potentially being unsafe, you know, or even, you know, for your own sort of, you know, you're at home and maybe you're going to skip a couple of steps while you're mowing the lawn or something, maybe not the most safe. You know, that's one thing. If you're recreationally being unsafe or you're being unsafe for your own benefit, but the idea that you're going to be at work on the job for which you are making money for somebody else, you are going to put your life in danger, your safety in danger for somebody else's profit? Brother. Brother. That's not metal. That's lame, actually. So, I did have to object to that. I did not buy that merch. But still, I am still a Maylene fan. I still enjoyed the concert. It was a lot of fun. My back hurts more now than it did before, and I've already been having some back problems. But it was a good time, so I hope other people can have similarly good times.
Yeah, just be safe this weekend. You know, I saw a lot of state troopers on my drive into the studio this morning, so be safe. Watch the speed limits. Don't get any tickets this weekend. It's not worth it.
Yeah, you know, I didn't see basically any cops on the way to or from Birmingham, which was kind of surprising because I was anticipating, you know, it was Friday night, the day before the 4th of July. You kind of figure that there'd be a bunch of cops. I think I saw one on the way back at like 1 a.m. So.
Well, they're out there.
Yeah, they're out there today. All right, but it is the 4th of July, and, you know, some of the festivities that many of us would like to partake in include, but are not limited to, hot dogs and hamburgers, right? People want to have hot dogs and hamburgers, and if you're going out today and this is the first time that you're getting hamburger meat in a while, or you got it last week for today, and you don't get hamburger meat very often, like me, typically I eat chicken or I eat ground turkey. And so, when you go and you try to get some red meat, you might get some sticker shock. And that has been the case for a long time. And unfortunately, the Trump administration has not done anything about it. They have been unwilling to take on the big meatpacking monopolies, so says the American Economic Liberties Project. And they go through a bunch of actions that the Trump administration has taken, some that experts would say would be likely to affect beef prices, others that the administration itself said were aimed at lowering beef prices. And the American Economic Liberties Project and Rethink Trade, a program at the American Economic Liberties Project, they demonstrate that none of those have actually had a huge impact on beef prices, and none of them have lowered beef prices, actually. And so here's some of the actions that the Trump administration has taken. The first action is the tariff increases, right? And so there's a lot of, especially when the Liberation Day tariffs took effect, there was a lot of hand-wringing in the media about how this was just going to completely destroy the American economy. And one of the reasons that it didn't is because the Liberation Day tariffs did not stay in effect for very long. But nevertheless, even following the insane tariffs, the universal tariffs that were put on all countries, basically, there were still very elevated levels of tariffs. And so the thought would be that this is going to raise ground beef prices substantially. Well, they only rose by 0.67%, the price of ground beef, as a result of, or in the time immediately following the Liberation Day tariffs. And so that's kind of strange. Then, following that, there was a lot of consternation about high prices, rightly so. And so the Trump administration was like, okay, we're going to cut tariffs and we're going to increase imports, and we're actually going to exempt most beef from tariffs altogether. That started in November of 2025. And yet, and as a result of that, imports grew by more than 10% for ground beef. But prices rose another almost 2%, 1.94%. And then following that, in February of this year, 2026, they were like, we really have to pull down beef prices. So, and I also want to help out the right-wing Argentina president Javier Milei ahead of their elections. And so then they increased the low-tariff Argentine import volume, and U.S. beef prices still remained flat. They did not decrease. What Rethink Trade shows is that the problems are structural. They're not about tariffs. They're about how 4 companies process 85% of U.S. beef. And 20 firms process 98% of cattle slaughtered nationwide. 3 of the big 4 have paid tens of millions of dollars in settlements for alleged price fixing, but none of them have been broken up, and the Trump administration is not doing anything about it. They talk about how independent feedlots are being squeezed out. They're talking about how the cattle herd is actually at its lowest since 1951, despite growing demand and higher cattle prices. And that's because these big 4 beef companies believe, rightly, that with a smaller cattle herd, they can extract more profit from consumers and actually also from ranchers who have to sell their cattle to these big 4 meat processors. Ranchers, stockers, and feedlots, the producer side of the supply chain, earn 16% less of the retail beef dollar than they did before consolidation took place in the beef industry. And since just 2017, more than 100,000 cattle operations have closed. And farm bankruptcies in April 2026 hit their highest level since the pandemic. And so, really, I mean, this is affecting everybody. If you want to have a good time on this 4th of July, you obviously are going to be looking at hot dogs, beef hot dogs and hamburgers. It's going to be costing a lot. And, funny enough, as this report lays out, it's not just Trump. Trump is not doing anything about it, but neither did the Biden administration, at least not as much as needed to be done. The Biden administration did bring some anti-monopoly lawsuits against some of these employers, some of these companies, but it wasn't enough. And so Rethink Trade says that the real solution here is to break up the big four meat packers through stronger antitrust enforcement, including the Packers and Stockyards Act, and enact the Family, Grocery, and Farmer Relief Act. They also say to reduce beef import quotas and raise in-quota and over-quota tariff rates to signal to ranchers to expand their domestic cattle herd. They also want to reinstate mandatory country of origin labeling through the bipartisan American Beef Labeling Act to provide U.S. consumers the information needed to support domestic cattle farmers. And they want to prosecute fraudulent U.S. origin claims so that large packers cannot profit from falsely branding imported beef or beef from imported cattle as American. I think these are very sensible recommendations, and they're recommendations that independent candidate for U.S. Senate in Nebraska, Dan Osborne, has been trumpeting for the better part of a year now, particularly the enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act. We talked about how, in Lexington, Nebraska, I think it was Tyson, closed a plant that was profitable, for which there was still a market for their product, just because they could make a little bit more profit by not having it open. And by doing that, they killed literally thousands of jobs. They were the number one employer in the region. And so the destruction of that plant has been completely devastating for Lexington, Nebraska. Dan Osborne has said that there should be enforcement action taken against Tyson for this, that he thinks that it was illegal for them to do that. But Nebraska's current senator, Pete Ricketts, does not think so. He thinks that what Tyson did was fine. It was fine to screw over working families in Lexington, Nebraska. It was fine to completely upend the economy so that people at the top could make a little bit more money. Just totally wicked. And all of this also comes as as a result of the increased imports from Argentina and other countries. There have been concerns about the screwworm infecting American cattle herds, in part because of Doge's destruction of some of the programs meant to, and that had successfully keep out the screwworm, some of these diseases that infect cattle herds.
Well, now in fairness, the U.S. Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, said that the loss of staff had no impact on screwworm response, and that it couldn't be more false, the fact that Doge had something to do with this. And just for the context, the screwworm is a age-old parasite problem that cattle deal with, and it had been eradicated. It is coming back, and it is spreading from Mexico north into Texas. There have been quite a few confirmed cases already. And the scary thing about it is that the Trump administration particularly with the Doge effort, cut funds to the U.S. Agency of International Development, USAID. And right around the same time, they also ended a temporary suspension on cattle imports from Mexico, meaning livestock was allowed to cross the border without any of this monitoring by USAID. Doge cut funds for the projects that were explicitly meant to monitor and contain the screwworm in Central America. And obviously, there have been federal workforce cuts across agencies, including the USDA, which has lost 20% of its staff. But the USDA says nothing to be worried about. That has no impact. In fact, they're doing a better job than ever. We'll let you decide.
This news also comes as the jobs report that was released from June was not very good. Not very many jobs created. Numbers revised down for the previous months. Wage growth is below inflation. Inflation's around 4%. Wage growth is around 3%. So people are, in real dollars, taking a pay cut. Prices are continuing to rise. Wages are falling. The unemployment rate dipped down a little bit last month, but that was more because people fell out of the labor force, not because they got new jobs. They just stopped looking for jobs. And so, there's a real sense of economic malaise, you could call it right now, in the country. And the current administration and people that support the current administration, both in government and in the media, are really having a difficult time, reacting to this. And it really does give me a sort of deja vu to how the Biden administration was acting towards the end of his term, because in response to real concerns from the American people about their standard of living and how it had not really improved since the Biden administration took office, even though, I don't know who would say that the economy was not better 18 months ago before Trump took office than it is today. I don't know how you could argue that. You couldn't. There's no, there's nothing that you could point to that would say that we're better off now than we were before. But under the Biden administration, because of the COVID era inflation, people's, standard of living had not really caught up to where it was prior to the pandemic, and people were still feeling the pinch, even though, I do think that you can argue that a lot of the Biden administration's policies were getting us to a place where, I think if the Biden administration, Harris had been elected and we had those policies allowed to play themselves out, we would be in a better place now. And I think that we would be, better than we were before the pandemic. But that was not allowed to happen. But instead of meeting the American people where they were at, instead of saying yes, it's true, your buying power has not recovered from the pandemic. And that's a problem. That's a problem in part due to greedflation and the fact that we have companies and billionaires that have so much power and are able to extract more profit from you as a consumer and a worker. Yes, there are still huge problems, and here's what we're going to do to address it. The Biden administration was like, look at what we have already done. Look at the things that we have already done and just be grateful for it. And that's obviously not going to be something that people who are struggling are willing to hear. Well, now we have Trump and the Republicans doing, I was about to say they're doing the same thing, but it's really worse. I want to play you a clip from Republican Congressman Nels from Texas, even though he is representing Texas, but you can hear in his accent, he's a Yankee. I looked it up. He's from Wisconsin. I don't know how he got, he was a sheriff in Wisconsin as recently as 2015 or something. So I don't know how he got to Texas, but he's representing Texas now. And just listen at, I don't know how to describe it any other way than contempt that he has for normal working people. Let's play clip one.
Congressman, real quick, how do House Republicans make the case that you're fighting for affordability when you go back to your districts?
Affordability? What are you talking about?
Well, affordability is the big...
I'm going to go there tomorrow. Over the 4th. I'm going to get me a couple big lobster tails. I'm going to get me some nice ribeyes. I'm going to sit in my backyard with my family, my neighbors. And we're going to be enjoying the 4th, celebrating 250 years, the birthday. We're going to be celebrating the greatest president in my lifetime, Donald J. Trump. Maybe watch some fireworks. Won't be up here. It's going to be too hot, right? And I'm in bed at 11 o'clock. I heard the fireworks ain't going off till 11 o'clock Eastern on the 4th of July. I probably have to sleep through that one. But listen, everybody understands you're going to see a little increase in energy prices because of Iran. I mean, come on. People aren't stupid. You realize that when you have a...
So he's talking about, I'm gonna be eating lobster tail. I mean, that you have to be a special maybe a special kind of stupid to hear about, people are having economic problems. People are having problems with affordability and their ability to just kind of live a normal life. And you're literally the first thing that you say, buddy, I'm eating lobster tails tomorrow.
I'm surprised you didn't mention caviar, champagne, some fine wines, perhaps.
Yeah. Buddy, I'm having lobster tails tomorrow. And then, really just telling people, get over it. Even though the administration embarked on this totally needless war, a war of choice. We were not threatened. The Trump's own security people, the Trump's own intelligence people, said that the Iranians were not moving towards developing a nuclear weapon. Took us on this war, and it is increasing prices for you. Get over it. Don't be stupid. I mean, that's kind of nuts. Let's continue.
Iran, but I think in the end, this short-term increase in some of the costs of energy, gasoline and stuff, is temporary. But President Trump has made it very clear to these companies: don't be gouging, no price gouging. I mean, energy, Oil was at $69 the other day, 72 today. I mean, the price has got to come down. Don't take advantage of the American people. To me, it's almost criminal.
You think 60% of Americans?
So we got to do that. We have to do that, and I think that the overall goal and objective is to make sure Iran never has a nuclear weapon. So I'm okay with the increase in fuel because you knew it was going to happen with oil and the Strait and everything. But it's a temporary issue.
You think the 60% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck can afford lobster tails and ribeyes and all of that?
Maybe not. Maybe the 60% of America don't work as hard as I do either. I mean, I don't know.
All right. If you can't afford or don't feel like your savings account can afford for you to be eating lobster tails today,
you don't work as hard as he does.
You don't work as hard as Mr. Fancy Pants Yankee Congressman.
That's a bold strategy.
To
insult
crazy.
Over 60% of the voting population.
It's crazy.
Hey, I know most of you are in this situation, and I'm going to insult most of you. And I'm an elected official. I don't know. That is a bold strategy. I don't know if he is that cocky that big money it will save him in his election, but that is really insulting. I mean, even if you voted for the guy, even if you agree with his politics, chances are you're closer to being paycheck to paycheck than living like he is.
Yeah, well, for sure. But because, Trump won people making under $50,000 a year for the first, that's the first time that a Republican has done that. Since, I don't even know. Has a Republican ever done that? I don't know. But it's the first time that it's happened in a long time at the very least. And so yes, the majority of people in that situation voted for the Trump administration, and so presumably for the down ballot Republicans like him. And so you have to wonder how the majority of people in that situation who voted for him feel about how he thinks that, I just have more money than you because I work harder than you, actually. And I deserve lobster tails and ribeyes and You don't.
All right. Enjoy your ramen.
There was another clip that sort of illustrated this sort of attitude on Fox News from Jesse Waters. Let's play clip 2.
To come here right now.
Some of these kids, and I call them kids because they're in their 20s, and they've never had real jobs, and they're complaining things are expensive. Yes, things are expensive when you don't have a real job.
Right.
I just want to say that I don't think that I don't think 60% of Americans, who are living paycheck to paycheck, 60% of Americans are not 20-year-olds without a job, right? That's just not the case. And so again,
Yeah, I mean, it's just not reality. It's just not reality, and it's really bold to go on TV and just lie to folks. But, that's what they're doing. And, I mean, it doesn't even add up. It really just... You can't make up 60% of the country with just 20-year-olds not working jobs. And of course he's talking about real job. What's a real job, buddy?
A real job is
like talking on
TV. Yes. Yes, that's a real job. That's how you get your hands calloused, is by sitting at a fancy desk talking about how everybody else is lazy. Let's continue.
Do you think that's getting traction? Complaining?
Unfortunately, I do, because this generation, my generation, I hate to say it, Gen Z and those younger than me have been raised with just silver spoons in their mouth, just getting everything handed to them. That's not the values this country was built on. It was built on meritocracy and hard work, pulling up your sleeves, pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, and achieving the American dream. And we need to protect it with all we got.
Is it laziness?
A little bit.
Is it because the professor said country's corrupt, it's evil, and we just need to shake them down and hand money out?
It's laziness, and it's the liberal indoctrination. You bring up a great point about our education system. However, I will say, a silver lining, so many parents that I talk to across the country are homeschooling, are turning to private education, are turning towards Christian schools across the country because they don't want their children being taught these communist and liberal ideas slammed down their throat. It's why President Trump in the White House has advocated so strongly for school choice across the country. We want kids to be taught to love our country. They should. It is the greatest country in the history of the world.
All right. I say, if they misbehave, just make all these young kids join the army, right? Shape them up. I almost had
or send them to Cuba. Send them to Iran. They'll want to come back real quick.
That's a good point. They can say hi to the gay Ayatollah. Thank you so much, and welcome back, Caroline.
Crazy.
That is baffling.
Yeah.
I avoid TV news, quote unquote. I do not watch any of the media stations on TV. I cut that out of my life years ago after, I think, the 2016 presidential election. I was like, you know what? This is really bad for my health. It just irritates me. I hate all these people and all the lies that they spew from so many directions. And it is just really baffling that this stuff airs on TV, and they can get on there and just say things that have no connection to material reality.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of the reason is that the real intended audience for this is, millionaire boomer retirees who watch Fox News, who want to complain about young people.
Kids these days.
Yeah. I mean, that's the real audience for that kind of stuff is millionaire boomer retirees who watch Fox News. And they don't want the rest of us to see it, is, the reality. But yeah. It's great.
Happy birthday, America.
Happy birthday, America. The people in charge of your country hate you. They hate you. They think they're better than you. And that's why they get to have lobster tails and you don't.
But hey, if you work really hard, one day you can talk on TV and lie to people, and you can have lobster tails too. Just keep licking the boots and maybe it'll happen.
Yeah. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report, folks, the largest union talk radio program in the South. We're going to be taking a break here momentarily, and then we will be talking a little bit about that history. I think with a professor of history, Joseph McCartin. I'm not sure if he's still going to be able to join us, so we'll see here in a few minutes if he's able to make it, but we'll be talking about the history regardless. We got some good stuff for you. Stay tuned, folks. We will be right back.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger food drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org. Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Tennessee to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Today on the program, we just talked about inflation,
lower wages, and how politicians are reacting to it. We're about to talk about America's 250th birthday with a historian and more. All that and more on today's program. If you want to call in, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send a text message to that number or send us a written note at tvlr.fm/contact. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, tvlr.fm, but we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. A huge source of our revenue comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or just make a one-time donation, you can go to patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report or tvlr.fm/donate. We've got a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store, and finally, if you're a member of a union, then you should think about getting your local, your district, your region, or your international to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
Hey y'all, let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. And we want to welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WGOW, WMSP, WCPT, KTNF, Means TV, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out at laborradionetwork.org. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a few diehard unionists who want to amplify the voices of the working class, especially here in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We really appreciate you spending some time with us, especially on this holiday today.
Every week in the South, workers organize new unions, they bargain new contracts, they fight for good legislation and against bad legislation, and they put the boss in their place. These are some of the stories that we could find last week from June 26th to July the 3rd. This is Last Week in Southern Labor. Over the last week, 113 workers in 5 bargaining units have gone public with their union campaigns, all in Florida's public sector. 148 workers across 8 bargaining units unionized, and 9,180 workers in 20 bargaining units in Florida's public sector recertified their unions. Those recertifications passed by an average of 96%. Less than 4% of the people who participated in all 20 of those elections wanted their unions to be decertified, and yet, under a new Florida law that took effect on July the 1st, the vast majority of those workers would have lost their unions. 7,795 workers in 17 bargaining units would have seen their unions dissolved. Next month, we'll start to see this law take its toll on Florida's public sector labor movement. But here are the details. 16 workers at Volusia County in Holly Hill, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Association of EMTs and Paramedics, an affiliate of the National Association of Government Employees, NAGE SEIU, Local 5000. 8 workers at Manatee County in Bradenton, Florida, also filed a petition to hold a union election with NAGE SEIU, Local 5000. In election results, 7 workers at Amentum Services in Houston, Texas, voted 6-0 in favor of unionization with the International Association of Machinists, IAM. 21 workers at Starbucks in Roswell, Georgia, voted 9-3 in favor of unionization with Starbucks Workers United. And 88 workers at REM Services and Transdev Services as joint employers in Houston, Texas, voted 71-0 in favor of unionization with the Teamsters, Local 988. 1,275 workers at Alachua County Public Schools in Gainesville, Florida, voted 182-12 in favor of recertifying the Alachua County Education Association as their union. 654 workers at the Miami-Dade County Clerk and Comptroller in Miami, Florida, voted 355 to 13 in favor of recertifying the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Local 199 is their union, and 474 workers at the city of Hialeah, Florida, voted 292 to 4 in favor of recertifying AFSCME Council 79 as their union. All the information on Florida's public sector union elections comes from McKenna Schuler's monthly roundup of Florida union news. You can check it out on her website, caringclassrevolt.substack.com, where you can get more information about Florida labor, see the full list of last month's Florida public sector union elections, as well as exclusive details about the union elections referenced here. In strikes and bargaining updates, the United Campus Workers at UT Knoxville just won an $18 an hour minimum wage, even without union recognition. It's a testament to the union's willingness to take on even hard campaigns in places that most unions won't touch because there is no path to a collective bargaining agreement. And yet, through direct action like petitions, speaking at board of trustee meetings, and putting pressure on the university president, over 400 workers saw that raise take effect last week. The union, which workers on campus join and pay dues to, even though there has not been and will not be a union election, said that their next goal is a $20 an hour minimum wage. In political and legislative updates, the president has officially announced that the U.S. is pulling out of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, otherwise known as the USMCA, Trump's rewrite of NAFTA. At the time, he called it the best and most important trade deal ever made by the USA. Now, his administration says that it allows for the U.S. to have too large of a trade deficit with Canada and Mexico. The agreement will stay in place for another decade with yearly reviews that could update major parts of the treaty. The U.S. and Mexico have begun their own bilateral talks, but none have started with Canada yet. The labor movement obviously takes a keen interest in these sorts of policy moves. The week before the announcement, the United Auto Workers, UAW, released a white paper outlining what a pro-worker trade deal would look like. You can read the full paper at uaw.org/trade, but the union had three key demands: build here to sell here provisions, ensuring that companies create and keep good jobs in the United States if they want to sell to the U.S. market, real labor rights that are enforceable and apply to workers in all three countries, and strong standards on pay and other key issues, including a manufacturing wage floor for North America and strict health and environmental protections. Notably, the union said that if those were not met, the U.S. should withdraw from the deal, as President Trump has now done. The UAW has not reacted to the most recent news from the White House. The International Association of Machinists, IAM, and the United Steelworkers, USW, also called for stronger protections and a renegotiated USMCA, though notably, they did not echo the UAW's call for withdrawing from it altogether if those demands were not met. And finally, in internal union affairs, the labor movement, particularly in the South, lost a giant in Vonda McDaniel, president of the Nashville Central Labor Council. She died unexpectedly last week. Her labor council announced the death on Facebook, saying that Vonda is remembered as a visionary leader and bridge builder in the South, and sorry, just lost it. Here it is again. Vonda is remembered as a visionary leader and bridge builder who spent her life bringing together people from all areas of the community to build multiracial working class power. She believed deeply that unions were for everyone and was committed to making life better for working families in Tennessee and in the South. Vonda embodied the courage of the labor movement's history while embracing innovation and moving us forward. She saw the potential in rank-and-file union members, young people, and people who didn't even know they were part of the labor movement yet. She empowered them to learn how to organize and how to take action. Throughout her tenure as CLC president, Vonda helped build and strengthen the movement infrastructure in Nashville and the state. She was a founding member of Stand Up Nashville, the Nashville Justice League, the Music City Construction Careers, and Tennessee for All. As a deep believer in building a more representative and inclusive labor movement, she intentionally invested in the leadership of black union members and mentored the next generation of union leaders and activists. She joined the United Rubber Workers in 1992 at the Bridgestone Firestone Laverne plant, where she worked for more than 30 years. Shortly after joining the union, she became a shop steward. In 1995, the rubber workers joined the steel workers, and Vonda was trained in the Steel Workers Women of Steel initiative, which equipped her with vital tools to become a leader in her union and her community. They said that Vonda's legacy calls us to carry forward the work to organize unions for everybody, to build bridges between community and labor, fight for racial and immigrant justice, and struggle for a better South and a better future for all. We can honor Vonda by joining or forming a union. We can honor her by building relationships with our neighbors and our co-workers, and we can honor her by door-knocking, canvassing, and voting and fighting for democracy. We mourn the loss of an irreplaceable leader, and we will continue to fight like hell to realize her vision. And I just want to say that for me personally, I have never been more shocked than I was at the announcement of a death than I was to hear about the death of Sister Vonda McDaniel. Being so young, I can't remember her exact age, but she was right around 60, and to be taken so suddenly was such a shock. And exactly like her labor council said, she took, I listed off only part of the things that she is still involved in, and she still took the time to invest in young union members like myself, and I learned so much from Vonda, and it's going to be very, very difficult, leading a labor council in the South without her to call for advice and to ask questions, and to have somebody like that was always willing to take those calls. Again, from a young person like me who has not been in the movement for nearly as long as her, who she's forgotten more than I'm going to know. It's really tough. And we lost somebody that was incredibly important to the South and to the labor movement. And I am going to miss her and feel her absence deeply.
Absolutely. It's going to be really tough to just move forward with the Labor Council and, not have her mentorship. She was a great mentor to not just folks like you and me, but so many people. Like I've run into so many people over the last few years in particular, where that's
the connection.
That's the connection we have. It's like, oh, well, Sister Vonda looks after me too.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge loss for the movement, and she was someone that I certainly looked up to. She was someone who was able to work with all types of people, and I really respected and admired that about her. She could work with young, fiery radicals. She could work with the old guard, moderate types. She could work with everything in between. She was a real one, and she poured into other people, which is what a true leader is really about. And so, I guess the only thing I'm trying to focus on at the moment is just how many seeds of leadership she planted throughout the South in particular, and how many of us have grown as leaders as a result of her work. So sending my love and prayers and solidarity to all of her family and to the many, many, many people that she impacted over the years.
If you are in the area or would like to come down, her visitation is on Tuesday, July the 5th at 5:30, with the funeral the following day, Wednesday, July 8th at 12 p.m. Noon. at the Music City Center, the Carl Dean Ballroom in Nashville, Tennessee. Professor Joseph McCartin is the executive director of the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. He joins us now to talk about the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. Professor McCartin, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, guys. It's a pleasure to be on this program. I've heard a lot about you, and it's great to be here. I must say, though, that I've just learned from what you've said about the death of Vonda McDaniel, and what a huge loss that is. I've known Vonda for only about 9 years or so, but everything you've said about her is true. She was a champion of labor. She worked with everybody, and she was an inspirational figure, and boy, is she going to be missed.
Yes, deeply, deeply missed. So, today is America's 250th birthday, and there are a lot of pieces going around about the founding era, the motivations of the founding fathers, etc. What do you think are some of the more important and underappreciated stories about America and its founding and its trajectory and where we are now 250 years later?
Well, I think one of the things that's been happening, and to some extent it's been orchestrated by the way this current administration wants to portray our 250th, but to a great extent there's been a focus solely on the founders, as if the idea of America came only from them, that they were, the indispensable figures. Not to take anything away from them, but that kind of portrayal leaves out so many. Without the people who rose to support that revolution, it wouldn't have happened. And indeed, the actions of local people, like the Minutemen of Massachusetts in Lexington and Concord in April of more than a year before the Declaration was founded. Without the actions of local people, working people, farmers, and others, trained militiamen who worked for their local governments, who responded to the call of their local governments, without them, there would have been no convention producing the Declaration of Independence a year later. So a lot of people get left out of the story. And I think about the people we should be bringing into it. For example, the story of James Armistead, who was an enslaved man in Virginia, who during the war volunteered to go undercover to infiltrate the British lines by claiming to be a runaway slave. The British, by the way, at that time were promising freedom to enslaved people who came over to their side. When Armistead went over to the British lines, he went over as a spy. He gathered key information, passed it back to the rebels, and that became, an important part of helping them resist the British movement. After the revolution succeeded, Armistead was not given his freedom, even though most African American enslaved people who did volunteer for the revolutionary forces, the army led by George Washington, were given freedom. He wasn't, because he hadn't fought on the front lines. He'd been a spy. He had to continuously petition the Virginia legislature to finally get his freedom in 1787, years later. And that sort of shows you the part of the revolution that often doesn't get talked about, and that this was a revolution for freedom. This was a revolution, as the Declaration put it, that affirmed the principle that all people were created equal, and yet it was waged by colonies where slavery thrived in most of them at the time of the revolution. And that problematic nature of the revolution, I think we need to keep in mind, because it helps us understand where we are hundreds of years later, 250 years later. Also, people like Tom Paine, whose writings were so crucial to the revolution, who was truly a progenitor of many radicals who would follow him through the years, including those who would build the American labor movement. So those are the kind of stories I think that need to be told more often.
And, you know, those stories do not strike me immediately as America hating, right? And I feel like anytime anybody says a story, like has a story like those that injects some level of nuance into the mythology of the American founding, that's what it gets tagged as. But I really do, like, you know, when I hear about, you know, the struggles that working people participated in to free themselves from the rule of the British, you know, I feel patriotic about that. I think that's really cool, and that is tempered, of course, by the betrayal of those people and of that slave that you mentioned by the people in power. But it does not, I don't believe, completely discredit the project. And you know, and so how do you deal with you know, containing those contradictions and looking at the founding of America? And, you know, I guess I'm not sure if you would consider yourself like patriotic or, you know, a fan of the American project. I suppose probably you are, at least to a certain extent.
I am.
But, and so,
yeah. Can I just jump in on that?
Please.
You know, to tell stories like that is not at all to be, you know, denigrating of the United States and its history. It's the way to celebrate it, in my view. I've dedicated my whole life, my whole training and my professional career has been the study of American history. I don't study it because I don't like America. I study it because I'm often inspired by the stories of our past, like that of James Armistead. And recalling his role, just to take one example, in the Revolution, is a way for us to be reminded that what happened in that revolutionary moment in 1776 was the beginning of a saga, was the beginning of a story that's still unfolding. The struggle to make real the idea that all people are created equal wasn't concluded with the, you know, surrender of the British in 1783. That's a struggle that went on many years later, and in a sense, to not recognize how that struggle followed on, how it led to people like Frederick Douglass in the 1850s, who at that time gave probably one of the most eloquent critiques of the celebration of the 4th of July, asking, you know, what is your 4th of July to the enslaved? And basically drawing the contradiction between celebration of freedom and the reality of slavery. That Douglass himself framed that speech loving America and believing it could redeem the promises of 1776 with the freedom of black people, as it would do in a bloody war several years later. So to tell these kind of stories is a way of deepening one's knowledge of one's own country, of locating oneself in a story as people who, just as the people in 1776 had to act to help create this country, we need to act to help preserve it, to keep it moving forward. So these are, you know, it's often said that historians like me who want to look at the complexity of the past are trying to in some way be anti-American, but it couldn't be further from the truth. We are people who want us to see all of what America is, and that includes some things that should trouble us, but also some things that inspire us and that help us move toward a higher ground.
You mentioned that, you know, the part of what's inspiring about the founding is its promise, and not that that everything was like 1776, like everything was finished and like all we have to do is continue their legacy. But rather the people who founded this country made a promise to all of its people in its founding documents, and that promise is incredible and inspirational and should inspire us, but we also do have to recognize that it was not fulfilled in 1776, and to a certain extent, it still has not been fulfilled yet for still everybody in this country. And that's something that New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani talked about in the speech that he gave yesterday, and in part of it that I want to play for you, and I want to get your reaction to it. But before I get your reaction to it, I'm going to read to you Ron DeSantis's reaction to this part of the clip, because it seems to me to just be totally bonkers how he reacted to it. But the meltdown over Mamdani's speech yesterday was I don't know if you're on Twitter or not, but it was sort of mind-numbing a little bit. But let's play this from Mamdani's speech yesterday.
There is a term so often used to describe our nation and those who have shaped it: American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism, the conventional wisdom tells us, makes our freedom a little more free, is how we dug the Erie Canal and irrigated the West, is why children in faraway lands grow up dreaming of one day moving here. And yet the irony is that the story of America has so often been written by those who were told by others with power and influence and wealth that they were anything but exceptional. For generation after generation, we have been told that when the world has sent its people to our shores, it has not sent its best. It sent Puritans and Sikhs and Quakers and Muslims and Jewish people who were banished for praying the wrong way, worshiping the wrong gods, angering the wrong people. It sent peasants and serfs from slums and shtetls who were treated as less because they hardly owned clothes, let alone land. It sent immigrants from whom power was something someone else had. We are told that America is exceptional because we are richer, stronger, more powerful than everyone else. The truth, my friends, is that America is exceptional because here, nothing is fixed into place. The frontier may be closed, we may have walked on the moon, but the work of fulfilling the values first enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that work endures, and it belongs to us all. It belongs to our newest Americans, those standing here with me today, all of whom were recently naturalized. Nearly a decade ago, I too felt what you feel, the joy of no longer being just a New Yorker, but an American too. You each hold a special power, the power to determine what America means. The powerful have always known their answer. America, in their view, is an arena of supremacy, where only a select few are allowed freedom, where not all are created equal. America, if you ask them, becomes less the more people it welcomes. But time and again, including 250 years ago, those forces of division have been vanquished by the forces of progress. As Thomas Paine once wrote, "This new world hath been the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty. Hither have they fled."
Lots of stuff just in that small clip, and I would really encourage people to go listen to the whole thing. It's 13 minutes long, it's short, you can do it, and after you listen to it, you'll be ready to run through a wall for America. It's really cool, and the people who don't see the patriotism in that speech, I think are either just lying or, are maybe a bit dull. And so Ron DeSantis reacted to that part of the clip where he said that America isn't exceptional because here nothing is fixed into place. Like, how is that not inspirational? Nothing is fixed into place in America. Anything can happen. You can do anything. It's part of the implication there. And we can do, as a project, we can do anything. He said, he quoted Calvin Coolidge on America's 150th anniversary, and Calvin Coolidge said, "It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, and that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern." If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward but backward. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. And so, what that's just a crazy thing to say, that, quoting somebody that, in 150 years after America's founding, we've not made progress. Actually, like, everything's great. Everything was great. Everything is great. That, in response to that part of the speech, I mean, what do you make of that as a reaction to the idea that America is exceptional in part because here nothing is fixed into place? How does that strike you?
Well, you used the word reactionary a moment ago. I think it's a very reactionary view of our history, of the revolution and of its heritage. And it's interesting that he goes back to Calvin Coolidge, not known as one of the great, most eloquent evokers of the meaning of what it is to be American. Now, it should be said that at the time Calvin Coolidge was making that statement, African American people were in a solidly second-class citizenship. Under Jim Crow, the separate but equal doctrine of Plessy versus Ferguson, that ruled the land. At that time, women had just barely gotten the right to vote a few years earlier. At that time that Coolidge spoke, the Ku Klux Klan was a force in the land. And inequality was surging in the 1920s. Coolidge was silent pretty much about all of that. So, that's Calvin Coolidge. I think, what's been happening in recent times, I think, is an effort to really attack the idea that America is and always has been an idea, an aspiration. And that's what I think Mamdani was evoking in his speech, the notion that anything can happen here, the promise that people's true potential can emerge in this kind of society with rights and democracy. Recently, for example, J.D. Vance laid out a view that America is not an idea, but rather what could be called a blood and soil nation, that it's descended from a certain culture, and basically unsaid in that statement, but at the heart of it is the idea that it's a white European entity. But our own history, from the very beginning, going back to James Armistead, who was certainly not a white European at the time of the Revolution, America has always been more than simply an inheritance of the European Enlightenment, say. It's always been, the product of complex interactions between settlers who arrived here and the natives who were already here, for example, like the Iroquois, who had their own systems of government and federation that colonists actually learned from. That, of course, the enslaved people, and then, as Mamdani says, generation after generation of new immigrants who came to this country to enrich it with what they brought to it, with themselves, their cultures. And so I consider what Mamdani said to be one of the more eloquent statements of what the American project is and has been about that I've heard in recent times.
Yes, I completely agree. And, we're talking on the 250th anniversary of the United States. And as we started the conversation, there's a lot of sort of narratives going around, hagiography about the founding era, and you're part of a project to try to inject some of these stories that we've been talking about, some of the working class contributions to the founding era and to the project of America called the People's 250. Can you talk to us a little bit about that project and some of the things that people can get from it?
Happy to. What a group of us decided a number of months ago is that we didn't like the way that things were developing in terms of the way this particular anniversary of our founding was being celebrated, that it was being highly politicized and from a sort of xenophobic and nationalistic kind of point of view. We wanted to open up a conversation that allowed common people, to anybody, to see themselves in as the inheritors of this revolutionary heritage, and to share their own stories about how they see themselves in the light of this American project. We've called it People's 250, and what we've been soliciting is people to make short videos on their cell phones, 2 minutes or less, that we then post on Instagram or TikTok, where you can share your own views, and we put the hashtag of People's 250 on those. And folks who are listening to this, if you look on your Instagram or TikTok for People's 250, hopefully you'll be able to find some of those, and you'll hear a wide variety of people recounting their own stories, many of them working people, talking about their own struggles in their unions and in other ways in their workplaces to make sure that the values of, democracy, rights, and freedom are preserved in those important locations. As people said in the early 20th century, very often, you can't have democracy unless you also have some measure of democracy in industry, industrial democracy. And today, I think this also holds true. The extent to which we really continue to live in a country of democracy and rights is dependent, I think, on how well we can preserve our rights at work, how well we can preserve our rights as consumers, how well we can preserve, our ability to have free speech in this country. So we wanted to provide a forum for people to make their own kind of statements, and welcome anybody who wants to do that to just make one and post it and put a People's 250 hashtag on it.
Could you talk a little bit about why you think that connection is so important? The connection, the thread from political democracy, which has been expanding since the founding era, to economic democracy, because there's a real, I think a concerted effort to try to firmly bifurcate that, to say that economic democracy is not a real legitimate expression of the American project, of the democratic values of this country. It's a completely separate thing, and actually a little bit it's kind of alien and foreign, and subversive and not American, actually, to want economic democracy, to want a voice on the job, to want a union contract. But I know that I completely reject that. I think that it's very American, but I think that it's necessary to have real political democracy. I think you also have to have economic democracy, and you spoke a little bit about that. I'm curious, why would you say that that's so important to having real political democracy?
Yeah, great question. A couple of things I will say. One, even Jefferson himself understood the relationship between economic democracy and political democracy to this extent. He believed that we could not have a democracy in which people didn't have easy access to owning property. And what he meant by people having access was white men having that access. But he did believe that the country would fail if white men didn't get to own land. That was one reason why he made the Louisiana Purchase. He understood that there was a relationship between, if you feel economically independent and secure, then you can truly participate in a democracy. If you are dependent and subservient to larger economic figures who dictate the terms and conditions of your life, you can't really challenge them in the political sphere either. And so Jefferson even understood that in his own way at that time. And I will say, right after the Revolution, the emergence of the trade union movement in the United States in the 1790s and early 1800s, the people who began to build that movement very much saw themselves as securing that economic freedom, which they felt was necessary as an adjunct to their political freedom. So the early union movements really saw themselves as carrying on the spirit of '76, as it would be said. When people celebrated the 4th of July, for example, in American cities like Philadelphia or Boston in the early 1800s, they generally organized parades where workers marched together behind banners of the trade that they pursued. People had a strong identity of themselves as workers. They believed that they needed to have rights as workers within this new democracy, and they saw the connection. So all through our history, I think, working people have in various ways discovered and carried on this tradition of demanding economic democracy. Otherwise, without it, we are in the thrall of the most powerful. And certainly in these days, when we have the world's first trillionaire, supposedly, in Elon Musk, when we have the dominance of the billionaire class in the United States over our policies, that's really underlining the necessity that the people themselves have lost power, that our democracy is starting to become a democracy in name only, that the reality of it is that the people's voice is squashed. And so reviving that tradition, it seems to me, is one of the most important tasks that those of us who do love America and do celebrate this day, it's one of the most important tasks that we could set for ourselves.
Professor Joseph McCartin, thank you so much for your time. Professor McCartin is the executive director of the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. Professor, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you very much.
We're going to take a break, folks. We will be right back to wrap up the first half of the show. If you want a good-paying union job in construction or nuclear plant maintenance in North Alabama, then you need to talk to the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA Local 366. They're recruiting for jobs right now, so if you're interested, please apply online at liunalocal366.com or call their hiring hall at 256-383-2466. That's 256-383-2466. No experience is needed, and we offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs and benefits is our mission. Live better, work union. Local 366. Feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW-represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about Labor Notes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Union leaders, do you want a powerful website and mobile app built just for your members? The Union Active system, created by Unions America, makes it easy to share news and documents, send alerts, and keep your members engaged anytime, anywhere. Trusted by thousands of unions, Union Active streamlines communication so you can focus on what matters most, your members. With real-time updates, secure messaging, and custom features built for unions, you'll keep your members informed and engaged 24/7. Get Union Active today. Visit unionactive.com to learn more. Union Active, the ultimate website and communication system for unions.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you're listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Like the stream if you're listening online. Give us 5 stars if you're listening as a podcast. All that good stuff. If you're listening to us on the radio, call the radio station and let them know, hey, we like the Valley Labor Report being on the air. All that good stuff. We're coming up on the end of the first half, but we've got a great second half of the program lined up for you. We're going to be talking to a Jesuit brother, Ken Homan, about the Pope's encyclical on AI. We're also going to be talking to him about a Catholic nun being abducted by ICE in Texas on her way to Mass. And we'll be talking about Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance's sugar daddy, telling people that he thinks the Pope is the Antichrist. Talking about all that and more. And then we're also going to be talking to, I pre-taped an interview yesterday with a political commentator, a lawyer, a YouTube streamer, Pisco, about the Supreme Court decisions, particularly the ones that are going to have the most effect on working people, the TPS decision, the birthright citizenship, campaign finance, and there was one more that we talked about. I'm having difficulty remember. There were 4. And I'm having difficulty remembering the 4th. But you'll hear about it because we already recorded the show. We already recorded that interview. So excited for that conversation. It's going to be fun. Excited for you to hear it. Let's get to Boss Watch, and then we'll wrap up the first half. Every day across the South, workers are killed on the job, stolen from, discriminated against, or sexually harassed, and sometimes the employers are caught. These are last week's stories. This is Boss Watch. In Texas, the U.S. Department of Labor has proposed more than $3.5 million in fines against 3 companies after federal inspectors determined that they failed to protect workers during post-emergency response cleanup after a chemical spill at the BWC Terminals Industrial Facility in Channelview. The department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration initiated 3 inspections after a December 27, 2025 sulfuric acid spill at the BWC Terminals Industrial Facility that led to multiple employee injuries. OSHA found that despite safety warnings, BWC Terminals mixed fresh and spent sulfuric acid, triggering a tank overpressure that ruptured a supply line, releasing 1 million gallons of sulfuric acid, resulting in multiple employee injuries. Following the spill, BWC Terminals contracted Coastal Environmental Solutions to handle hazardous waste cleanup, and Coastal Environmental Solutions hired subcontractor One Way Environmental Solutions to provide laborers for the cleanup and remediation process. Assistant Secretary for Occupational Health and Safety David Keeling said, despite having full knowledge of the severe hazards involved in the spill and cleanup response, these 3 employers chose to bypass OSHA requirements and put their workers at serious risk. Their joint failure to protect workers was not an oversight, it was a choice that resulted in preventable employee injuries and environmental impacts. We will not hesitate to hold employers accountable when they ignore federal laws that are in place to protect workers' safety and health. OSHA investigators cited One-Way Environmental Services for 18 willful, egregious, and 5 serious violations after investigators found the employer sent workers to clean up the chemical spill without adequate training, respirator fit tests, or safety measures. OSHA proposed $3 million in penalties. Coastal Environmental Solutions faces $392,000 in proposed penalties for 2 willful and 5 serious violations that include a lack of training, a safety and health program, an emergency response plan for hazardous waste operations and emergency response, and deficiencies related to use of respirators. BWC Terminals was cited with 6 serious violations for exposing workers to chemical burns, failing to provide hazmat training, and deficiencies relating to the use of respirators. OSHA proposed $82,000 in penalties. Cumulatively, proposed penalties against the 3 employers total $3.5 million. In Virginia, the Salvation Army, headquartered in Virginia with a facility in Lynchburg, violated federal law when it discriminated against an employee by denying her a reasonable accommodation to seek treatment for cancer and caused her to be separated from her employment, according to a lawsuit announced last week by the EEOC. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's lawsuit, in October of 2024, a caseworker with Hodgkin's lymphoma provided the Salvation Army with a medical note stating her chemotherapy treatments would continue through February 2025 and asking for intermittent leave for the treatments and related recovery. Instead of doing that, the Salvation Army told the employee it needed to let her go. She was presented with 2 options: resign and be eligible for re-employment when she was healthy, or be fired and no longer eligible for re-employment with the Salvation Army. The employee, who wanted to continue her employment with the Salvation Army, was forced to resign. Melinda Dugas, regional attorney for the EEOC's Charlotte district, said absent undue hardship, intermittent leave can be a reasonable accommodation that allows employees to continue to perform the essential functions of the job while receiving medical treatments for a disability. Such alleged conduct violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, which requires the accommodation of disabilities absent undue hardship, and prohibits employers from discharging an employee because of their disability or because they requested an accommodation. The EEOC filed suit in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Virginia, Lynchburg Division, after first attempting to reach a pre-litigation settlement through its administrative conciliation process. Can you imagine? The Salvation Army had the opportunity to reach a pre-litigation settlement and presumably avoid the press release, avoid being sued for forcing a cancer patient to resign because they had cancer. They could have avoided that, but the Salvation Army was like, no, actually, we're proud that we forced our cancer employee to resign or be fired because they were going through chemo. I mean, that's kind of crazy. That is kind of nuts. But that's it for our show today, folks, for the first half anyway. Really appreciate everybody hanging out with us. If you want to support the program, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate and make a monthly contribution, or just donate once. If you like today's show in particular, you can give us $5 for that, or whatever amount of money that you want to give us. We'll take it. We appreciate it.
$17.76.
You could give us $17.76. That's right. Roll Tide. You could do that. However much you want to give to support us, we would appreciate it. and share the show with your friends, particularly when it's something that's relevant to them. Like I said, we got a great second half of the show lined up. We're going to be talking to Ken Homan. We're also going to be talking about a couple of cool stories that I'm excited to share with you. Lots of good stuff that we'll be talking about in the second half of the show. So find us Facebook, YouTube, The Valley Labor Report, to continue listening. But if you don't do that, we appreciate your time that you spent with us on the radio this week, and we'll see you next week. All right, we're off the radio now. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
is Overtime, a production of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio and online news outfit in the South, coming to you from the heart of the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama, now broadcasting in Chicago and Minneapolis. We are run by working people and for working people in the South and all over the country. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending some time with us. If you'd like to call in, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send a text message to that number or send us a written note at tvlr.fm/contact. We got some great stuff for you today. Wanted to start with a story in Chicago, just outside of Chicago, where members of UAW Local 5101, representing workers at Woodward MPC, they voted by 71% to authorize a strike after months of company stall tactics and unfair labor practices during contract negotiations. So says the UAW, 800 members of that local. The UAW says in their press release that Woodward workers voted to affiliate with the UAW last fall, and since then, the company has committed over 36 unfair labor practices, including total refusal to negotiate with the union. Workers are fighting for industry-leading wages, fair progression, time off, and job security. Members held a practice picket outside the facility late in June. The UAW president, Shawn Fain, said that UAW members at Woodward have sent a clear message to the company to stop with the illegal delay tactics, to bargain a fair agreement, or we're ready to strike. Management has a choice to make: negotiate a contract or face a strike. Region 4 Director Brandon Campbell said Woodward needs to get serious about reaching a fair deal with the nearly 900 workers who make this company run. Local 5101 is done waiting for the company to do the right thing, and Region 4 has their backs. Local 5101 President Jose Tapia said, our membership can't wait another 9 months for a fair contract. So now is our time at Woodward MPC, and we're ready to do whatever it takes to win our fair share. The workers at Woodward build commercial and military aviation equipment for Woodward's customers, including the U.S. government, Boeing, and more. Woodward made over $1.7 billion in profits since 2020 and has paid its CEO over $30 million in the same time frame, while workers are struggling to make ends meet. So we'll be keeping an eye on that story just outside of Chicago and wishing them all the best. If you work at Woodward and you'd like to call in, you can leave us a voicemail at any time, 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. We would love to hear from you about conditions inside the plant and why you voted to authorize a strike and why you're willing to strike if necessary. And we're hoping that they negotiate a fair contract with you sooner rather than later. Speaking of fair contracts, this is kind of an old story. If you follow union news, you probably saw the headlines, but I wanted to deliver it to you here while we had a little bit of time. New York City hotel housekeepers are going to earn over $100,000 a year under their new union contract. That's the headline from the New York Times about a contract that was ratified in May, just like a month and a half ago or so. I mean, super, super exciting news. They were able to get that deal because of the leverage that they had due to the World Cup and America 250 festivities, et cetera, et cetera. The owners of nearly 250 hotels in the city reached an agreement with the union, the Hotel and Gaming Trades Council, on an 8-year contract that by the end of the contract in 2034 would increase wages by more than 50% for workers. The hotel owners will continue to pay the full cost of providing health care benefits for the 27,000 union members and their families as well, in addition to the over 50% pay increase. Right now, workers are making slightly below $40 an hour. That pay will increase to $61 an hour by 2034. They talked about how wage increases were kind of the primary point of the negotiations during this round, and they were very obviously able to, they were able to get significantly increased wages. Really exciting news out of New York. The New York Times talked about how Mamdani supported the workers in their contract negotiations. And it seems like a really, really good contract. The last contract, the New York Times reports, started in 2012 as a 7-year deal. It included annual raises of 3.5 to 4%. Although that contract was already substantially longer than most labor contracts, the union and the Hotel Association extended it a few years later for an additional 7 years. This one a lot different than their most recent contract. Really exciting stuff. Really exciting stuff for them. If you work as a hotel housekeeper in New York and you'd like to call in, we would love to hear from you. 844-899-TVLR. You can leave us a voicemail again at any time. 844-899-TVLR. Would love to hear.
And if you work in housekeeping and you do not earn anywhere close to that, you need a union. And I know that there are folks out there in the hospitality industry all over the state of Alabama, all over the South, in our broadcast areas, all over Chicago, Minneapolis. There are folks working in hospitality who don't have a union yet, and you really do need one. It is the pathway to a better life. It's how you can organize collectively with your coworkers and win contracts like this that are historic, that are life-changing. I mean, generational changing, right? Having health care for your family is such a huge priority for so many folks. And it is something that you're priced out of in a lot of jobs. So, yeah, shout out to the union there for a huge win. That's great. I mean, and why, I think, honestly, any job could be a good union job. And when we look back at our history, a lot of jobs that are now not organized and are, often considered like lower tier jobs, maybe don't pay as well, don't have good benefits. In a lot of cases, those used to be union jobs, right? Or at least in some areas and in some sectors. So to me, if you have a boss, you have a paycheck, someone else signs this paycheck, you have to report to somebody and you're an employee, you need a labor union. It's really important.
Absolutely. One more quick story with some national relevance. There's been a lot of DSA upsets in congressional primaries over the last couple of weeks. We talked last week to Vail Conert-Yunt, the assistant director for UAW Region 9A, about the recent victories in New York, where 2 UAW members won their primaries and are now going to be going to Congress, barring something crazy happening. Claire Valdez and Daria Lisa Avila Chevalier. Brad Lander also won, also was endorsed by UAW Region 9A. Daria Lisa and Claire, also DSA members endorsed by DSA. Following that, you had Melat Quiros in Colorado win as well. Just lots of upsets and lots of, people on the more progressive populist wing of the Democratic Party winning in primaries recently. There's another one that's going to be coming up in the next few weeks or the next couple of months in Florida's primary. That's Oliver Larkin challenging Jared Moskowitz in Florida. And for people who, follow the labor movement very closely, for people who, listen to this program, you're going to know probably that the labor movement generally is pretty conservative in its endorsements. It's typically going to endorse incumbents. It's typically not going to endorse challengers over incumbents, because, unfortunately, unions just aren't as powerful as they used to be, and it's easier, frankly, for unions to endorse incumbents. That way, if the incumbent wins, as they typically do, then they are going to be able to at least have that in. Hey, we endorsed you. Can we have a conversation about this policy or something? Whereas, on the other end, if they don't endorse the progressive challenger who is going to be more pro-union in their voting record, they're not going to really face any backlash, where they could very much face backlash if they don't endorse a moderate incumbent, right? Because they don't have that ideological commitment to being pro-union in the same way that a more progressive or a socialist challenger would. But even though it is the case that typically the labor movement is very conservative in its, in its endorsement, I was surprised to learn that last week the Florida AFL-CIO declined to endorse Jared Moskowitz. Oliver Larkin, a DSA member who is challenging Jared Moskowitz, DSA member, also a union organizer, member of CWA, went to the COPE convention and encouraged delegates not to endorse Jared Moskowitz because of several reasons. There were, lots of anti-union things that Moskowitz has done in office. Moskowitz also a very, very strong supporter of Israel in a time where that is, just from a political standpoint, it doesn't really make much sense, but from a moral standpoint also is a lot of people find disqualifying, and has really tried to kind of attach himself to the Trump administration, which has done huge damage to, to the labor movement. Also was appointed to a couple of commissions by Ron DeSantis, who is right now, orchestrating a wrecking ball through Florida's public sector labor movement. And so, shockingly, frankly, the Florida AFL-CIO did decline to endorse Jared Moskowitz. They also did not endorse Oliver Larkin, but I think that's a really big deal that the labor movement in the state of Florida decided not to endorse the incumbent Democrat in that race, the safer option, and is potentially risking making Jared Moskowitz upset. And so it'll be interesting to we'll be checking in on this primary as the race continues. But wanted to bring y'all that update because huge news, not the norm at all. I believe that we've got Ken Holman in the Zoom. Ken Holman is a Jesuit brother and a member of the Catholic Labor Network. Ken, welcome, Brother Holman. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, it's so awesome and wonderful to be with you here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. I really appreciate you taking the time. For people who don't know, you were actually on our live stream, our 52-hour live stream 5 years ago to raise money for the UMWA, their strike fund when they were striking at Warrior Met in Brookwood, Alabama. So we appreciate you doing that. I think you also did it late at night, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's great to have you on after all that time. I mentioned that you're a member of the Catholic Labor Network. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Catholic Labor Network is a group of mostly lay individuals, but certainly some priests, clergy, nuns, brothers like myself who are involved. And it's our goal to kind of do twofold things here. One would be to help really bring a labor identity to Catholic spaces, we'll say, to help universities, hospitals, Catholic social services, all these different kind of Catholic agencies to really respect the dignity of labor, the right to unionize, to bargain fairly, all those sorts of things. It's also to help bring Catholics to more labor spaces to say, this is part of our tradition, this is part of our doctrine, this is part of our identity. We need to be out on the picket lines. We need to be in the organizing meetings. We need to be supporting workers. So our mission is kind of twofold, to be in both of those spaces at the same time.
Well, I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot of great work that religious people have done in the labor movement, and there's a lot of overlap, I think, between most faith traditions and the goals of the labor movement. So I really appreciate what y'all are doing at the Catholic Labor Network. And being the Catholic Labor Network, of course, y'all are, you like the Pope, presumably. And a few weeks ago, Pope Leo XIV released his encyclical on AI. I think this was his first real encyclical. I think that there was something that he did, kind of finished something from Pope Francis. But this was his first big encyclical. It was on AI. Can you tell us what were some of the top lines from that encyclical?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can really see, we'll say, Leo's thumbprint on this one, that, the Francis documents certainly had his flavor on them. The Leo one certainly has his own. One of my favorites, and I think this is a really good one just for thinking about solidarity in general and how we express it, is from paragraph 57. It says, "It is therefore not enough to state simply that men and women have equal dignity and rights. It is necessary that this be reflected in concrete decisions, such as laws, access to employment, education, social and political responsibilities, and the way society listens to and values men's and women's contributions." And I think this one is really important because, especially for our own, we'll say Catholic organizations, there's this real tendency to say like, well, we could do that. That might be the right way to go. We could consider that sort of thing. And Leo here is saying, we're not doing possibilities. We're not doing, maybes. We're doing concrete. It is to bargain. It is to show up and pass laws that support workers and immigrants. It is to protect the rights and dignity of people in really tangible and concrete ways, and to show up and show solidarity in that it's not passable. It's not easy. It's not, like, oh, I wrote a letter of support. It's show up to the picket line. You need to be there. You need to support the workers. You need to show up and show out for the Immigrant Day of Action. You need to be participating in actions at the town halls, at state assemblies, these sorts of things, that we have to really put ourselves on the line and express solidarity in concrete ways. And I think that's a really important element here.
Something that he did in the encyclical was, he tried to he used a couple of biblical stories to try to illustrate the value of that sort of solidarity and the connectedness and the humanity that exists in people and the importance of it. And those were the Tower of Babel and the building of the city of Jerusalem. Can you talk a little bit about what were the themes that he pulled on in those biblical stories, and how did he try to connect them to the importance of solidarity and human connection?
Yeah, absolutely. And I perhaps one for really the building trades to to appreciate a story about building together here. I think there's a couple really important elements at play here. So the Tower of Babel is this story about really trying to compete with God and to say we have more power than God, we have more ability than God, and we can build this by oppressing our neighbors. We can do this by treating immigrants terribly. We can do this by mistreating workers. And so God says, you're not then a community, so we're going to have different languages. You're not going to understand each other. And we often think about this building, the Tower of Babel, as just competition against God, but it's against our neighbors. And so that, would be a real Catholic understanding of sin is never just against God. Sin is never just against one's neighbor. It's always against both at the same time. And so that's kind of the story of the Tower of Babel that I think he's really pulling on here, is a lack of solidarity is in some ways sinful. It is ignoring the well-being, the dignity of your neighbors. Versus the other story, the building up of Jerusalem, is the community coming together and saying, we're going to reaffirm the rights of people. We're going to reaffirm dignity. And Scripture is full of all of these kinds of passages. There are rules in the Tanakh that say you can't harvest all the way to the edge of your fields, for example, and that's because that immigrants, passersby should be able to, grab a handful of almonds, grab a handful of grapes on their way by to sustain them. And so it's really about taking care of the community. And so I think that's what those stories harken back to, is you have to show solidarity if you truly want to belong to God.
And, the allegory to the Tower of Babel that I think that Pope Leo was making was to AI, and how some of the ways that it's being talked about and that it's being envisioned to be used is really, is not in community, is not with respect for neighbors and understanding that, the image of God exists in the little people. How does he make that connection explicit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it is Leo does a really great job recognizing the power of what we can call a knowledge economy. The U.S. by and large is not a manufacturing kingpin anymore, and it's probably not going to go back to that. So much of our economy is driven by healthcare, by education, by having knowledge. But Leo has this really great understanding of what is also underneath that economy. I'll actually give me one sec. I'll pull up another line here. Where he talks about I can't find it off the top of my head here, but the thing he talks about is our computers come from somewhere. They come from people in war-torn areas in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Central and East Africa, that are, harvesting these materials, that are doing the mining. It's incredibly toxic to both the people and to the environment. And then you also have people working in these, I'm just going to call them laboratories for lack of a better word, these warehouse laboratories where they are doing the coding, they're doing the identification, the labeling, all of these things. And they're really hidden elements of the knowledge economy. And that's what he's connecting to this Tower of Babel, is that we're pursuing, we're challenging, we're trying to create these structures so that a few people can control knowledge and everyone else is just hidden. Everyone else is dehumanized, is alienated from their labor, is damaging their common home, all these sorts of different elements. And so that's what he's making the connection to.
And so what are some of the guideposts that he tries to put out in his encyclical for the development and the use of AI? Because it's not like the AI says, Catholics can't use AI and that AI is necessarily bad, and that we have to stop it completely. But instead of that approach, he takes an approach that kind of puts guideposts on the road. What are some of those that he tries to deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a few really important guideposts. One is, as we kind of already named, solidarity. The Catholic Church teaches what's called preferential option for the poor and the marginalized, and that in whatever kind of decisions we're making, we have to prioritize the voices and the lives and the dignity of the poor and the marginalized. And so when we're looking at how to create AI infrastructure, we have to have at the table the people most affected by AI, the people who are in those mining camps, the people who are refugees who are being displaced by the wars going on associated with them. They have to be part of these conversations. The other element of it, kind of on the user end, we'll say, the people who might use AI every day, is considering things like how is a community being affected when a new data center is built, is thinking about how are we trying to use knowledge? Are we using knowledge to, I'll just make this job easier and we'll get it done with kind of thing? Are we using it to try and advance knowledge? So, for example, I have a colleague who does archaeology work, and he asked an AI program to size up and categorize a number of artifacts that he was looking at and to organize them. I think that's kind of like a passable, acceptable use of AI, for example, when you're saying, just organize these things for me, because it's adding to the knowledge that he can then do himself as the scholar. Versus, for myself, with that, when I have students who say like, oh, I don't really want to write this paper, I'm just going to have AI do it. It's a self-alienation. It's saying, well, I don't need knowledge. I can let somebody else have knowledge. That we're supposed to pursue truth. We're supposed to pursue knowledge, and saying this is for somebody else or somebody else can control it. So those, I think, are two of the big guideposts, would be the preferential option for the poor and making sure that we're not alienating knowledge.
How do you think that the AI companies are doing with respect to those guideposts?
I think this is a real challenge for us to consider and it's a real opportunity to deeply imbibe that sense of solidarity. Uh, we've had a bit of an experience. I'll just talk about, here in St. Louis, where I'm a little more familiar, where a number of the building unions and the teachers union have come out in favor of building a big data center in Midtown St. Louis. None of the other unions have necessarily come out against it because they don't want to have this, union against union fight here in the city, because there's so many other needs for solidarity. But you can tell there's a lot of anxiety about it. The community groups have really been standing up against it. A number of church groups, Black civil rights organizations have really stood up and said, like, this isn't here to benefit our community. It might give us some tax benefit short term. It might give us some job benefit short term, but we shouldn't totally alter our community for the benefit of these companies. And I saw a really great piece the other day too about the cooling of these data centers, for example, that we talk about, oh my gosh, they use so much water. Well, you don't have to use water to cool a data center. You can use other chemical compounds. You can do immersive processes. There are other ways to cool it. The water's just the cheapest. It's very abundant, even in places where, we're facing drought. You can still get water in some of these places. And so I think we need to have a real conversation about our unions upholding their end of the bargain of solidarity and supporting communities, that common good unionism that has been so impactful. Because I don't think the companies are really doing well with it themselves. I think we're consuming a lot of people's souls doing this data labeling that I talked about, or the coding, things like that, where people are encountering really horrific things on the internet. And they have to sit there and talk about them and categorize them, and they don't get psychological or emotional supports that they need. So I don't think we are anywhere near the targets that we should be or that he lays out.
The encyclical builds on over a century of what's called Catholic social teaching that started with Pope Leo's namesake, Pope Leo the 13th. Can you talk a little bit about the development of Catholic social teaching and where this encyclical kind of fits within that history?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big thing that really set off Catholic social teaching was this document called Rerum Novarum, literally translates to of new things. And so Leo the 13th was looking at this big expansion of industrialization across Europe and even a little into the United States. But it's really important to remember in 1891, Leo himself, the 13th, is still very kind of Europe focused. They're real concerned with the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, rising Marxist movements, things like this. And he says, like, the church has to be active and engaged in the world. It has to be actively tackling the issues that workers are facing. Do they have enough to eat? Do they have a safe place to live? Are they able to raise their families? Do their kids get to go to school? All these different elements show up in Rerum Novarum. And that's what really lays the foundation, is that it is all absolutely centered in human dignity because we're made in the image and likeness of God. God gave us dignity, and it's our duty as humans to take care of each other. Some of the big developments that end up coming really transformed to help us get to where we are now. 40 years after Rerum Novarum is a document Quadragesimo Anno, like literally 40th year, that is in 1931. So we've hit the Great Depression, and the church is saying, we're getting these economic models, we're getting these social theories that are not prioritizing human dignity. They're not prioritizing well-being and flourishing. And so we really have to transform and to get Catholics in the public sphere actively supporting workers' rights. And so we really have to step out from our comfort zones. Where it really takes an interesting transformation is in the 1960s and into the 1970s. So up to that point, the church is really talking about this focus on industrialized Europe, industrialized United States. In the 1960s and 70s, the language turns to social development and starts taking this big international look and saying, the church is global. We have to act like it. We have to be attentive to the needs of workers in Vietnam. We have to be attentive to the needs of workers and human rights in Honduras. We have to actively pursue social development and human development in all these places. And I think that's a lot of what lays a foundation for Leo the 14th then in this encyclical, is to say, just because there's an AI data center question happening here in St. Louis, Missouri, doesn't mean we get to ignore the baseline elements of it going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that all of these things are connected and that our solidarity needs to take into account all of these different people.
How does the Catholic Church how does it justify the social teaching aspect of the church? Because, I know particularly in the South, there's a lot of people who grew up kind of evangelical, and there's a lot of actually kind of right-wing politics in church, particularly in the South. But where there's where that's not so explicit, there's a real idea that that really the church doesn't have actually that much to say about the way that about politics. It's got a few things here and there, but by and large, the gospel and the life of the church is to be focused on kind of the individual salvation of its members and bringing in more people to be members for their individual salvation. That's not the Catholic Church's view. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a few different elements going on here. One is sacramental theology. So for Roman Catholics, the summit of our religious life on a regular basis is going to Mass and participating in the Eucharist. And we as Roman Catholics believe the Eucharist is truly the body and blood of Christ. And I know that's, gets into a lot of theology for different communities who might, be a little unsure of that. But underneath that is this idea that at the Last Supper, Jesus is having a meal with his best friends. He is having a meal with his kind of brothers in this movement, and sisters likely there too, let's be honest, that you can't have faith alone. There's no such thing as faith by myself. There's no such thing as, I go to Mass alone, because you're coming to a table. You are coming to a gathering space with lots of different people. And I think this is one of the challenges too that arises for us then is, can I come to the table with somebody I really don't like? Can I come to the table with someone who really challenges me? And this shows up in Scripture where Jesus says, before you show up, you have to go make peace with your siblings. You have to go make peace with your neighbor. And we actually start in Mass. There's like a little mini reconciliation where you make that peace with each other. And so I think that's the element here, is that you can't do faith alone and you can't do solidarity alone. And so this idea of politics coming from polis, the people, the community, is that fundamentally our faith is a communal one. And this shows up especially in scriptures where, Jesus says, the lambs on my right, the goats on my left, did you visit me in prison? Did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you take care of me? Did you take care of the widow and the orphan? If we're not doing those things, then we don't actually love Christ.
J.D. Vance is a recent high-profile convert to Catholicism. He has credited his trip to his conversion to the Catholic Church in large part to Peter Thiel, funny enough. And Peter Thiel has, for a while, been talking about how, maybe this Pope is the Antichrist, but has been particularly exercised by this encyclical saying that, this is potentially evidence that Pope Leo is in league with the Chinese communists. As a Catholic and a religious brother in the Catholic Church, how does that, how do you react to that?
I mean, my initial reaction, in all honesty, is like, well, that just sounds goofy. That just sounds nonsensical. That this idea that there's a secret cabal controlling Pope Leo, or, that Pope Francis was totally influenced by all of these globalists. It's just kind of odd to me, in all honesty. I think there's that element of it. But I think there's something else going on here, and it's this desire to say, I'm going to force my faith to fit inside these preconceived notions. And I want to hang on to these preconceived notions. And so we're going to wedge faith in there and make it fit. And anytime faith kind of starts folding over the top, starts pushing those boundaries, starts challenging those norms that we set out for ourselves, well, then we've got to find some way to contain it and put it back in its box here. And this is, one of the things for myself, my own prayer life, my own spirituality as a Jesuit, is we talk about what are our unfreedoms or what are our attachments? What are those things that distract us from God? What are those things that distract us from love of our neighbor? And I would invite Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance to pray with what are their attachments? What are the things that they are saying, I'm going to prioritize this before God and my neighbor? Because those are the things that are going to hold them back in their own faith lives, and hold them back from this true expression of solidarity and neighborliness.
He really does seem sort of shockingly willing to criticize the leader of the religion that he recently converted to. I mean, that just seems like a strange sort of deal to like get to a party that's been going on for 2,000 years, like, 24 months ago, and start telling the leader of it that, are you really doing Catholicism right? I'm not, totally sure. I think that maybe you should take a back seat on, the social teaching aspect, on the immigration policies. And I don't know, that just like, it seems strange to me that he, I think it would be one thing to just kind of demur and say, well, I really respect the Pope and I take what he says to heart. And then like, that's all you say. But I don't know, it just, that seems strange to me, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And, I think it's this question of what moves us to conversion, or what is behind us, what inspires us. So, for like myself, I grew up Roman Catholic. I grew up, my dad taught theology for 25 years at the college level. And my mom worked in public health and built the school of public health at SLU. And probably until I was like 15, 16 years old, my faith was just a political argument. It was to say, well, we all grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic schools, and so you have to believe these things. You have to fight for workers' rights. And then had this real moment of my own kind of, come to Jesus moment, we'll say, where I was at this big social justice gathering. And it was the first time I really felt a sense of belonging. And I did wrestle with. I've wrestled with things that previous leaders in the church have said. I've wrestled with things that, trying to support and care for my neighbors in different ways. It can be challenging. You have to wrestle with it. Now, I think it's fair to wrestle. I don't know if it's wise to wrestle real publicly and to wrestle on national media. I don't think that's the best choice. But to wrestle with one's faith, I think, is kind of a normal thing to do.
One of the subjects of that wrestling is around the immigration question, and a very high profile incident last week that happened was a nun in Texas was abducted by ICE. She was subsequently released following a lot of bipartisan backlash to the arrest. But how do you think that this administration's immigration policy has affected Catholics, both as workers and as members of their faith communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I think there's two elements here. One is as workers that the really aggressive anti-immigrant rhetoric, the aggressive anti-immigrant actions, these giant attempts at doing big sweeps of people, that they're fundamentally contrary to what we as Catholics teach. That, for us, one of our big priorities is the family, protecting families, supporting families. To take a parent, to take a loved one, to take a sibling away from their family without any kind of due process, without any kind of regard for community well-being, is fundamentally opposed to the common good. It is fundamentally opposed to human dignity. And so I think there's that element that's really at stake here. Real tangibly for us as Catholics, I know for some Catholics, priests, we often historically have been able to get visas to other countries to say, oh, I'm going to be studying at the seminary there, or I'm going to be doing like an internship and learning some skills at this, hospital or at this high school, things like that. Those visas have been harder to get. Those visas have been blocked for certain countries. And so it is actually directly impacting the ability of like priests and clergy to migrate, to follow where their ministry is at, to be able to do further education, these sorts of things. And it, I think, is real easy and real tempting to look at this story of the sister and say like, oh my God, how terrible. And it is very terrible. She shares the same human dignity though, even as someone who, crossed without documentation. She shares the same human dignity as someone who might have petty theft, might have major theft, that fundamentally we all share human dignity. And our immigration policies and our immigration actions need to follow that human dignity. And it's easy to look at a story of a nun and be like, oh, what a tragedy. But we need to look at the same story of any immigrant who's picked up with this kind of lack of dignity and say, this is also a tragedy.
Brother Ken Homan, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking with us this morning. Is there anything else that you'd want to leave us with before we let you go?
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity here for all of us to consider, for those, if you're a person of faith, to pray about, but no matter who you are, to really consider and say, what do I want my community to look like? What kind of place do I want my kids to be raised in? What kind of common good do I want to build? And this is where I really want to challenge my union siblings as well here, is it's really easy to say, I've got mine, I got my contract, I got my piece of the pie. It's a lot harder, but I think a lot more meaningful in the long term to say, what did I help somebody else achieve? What solidarity did I express? How did I make this community better? Not just for my own contract, but much more broadly. And I think that's the real challenge that I think a lot of unions are really going to have to face in the coming months and years.
That sounds like a great way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful to be here.
Great having you. Again, that was Ken Homan, a Jesuit brother from St. Louis, member of the Catholic Labor Network as well. We've got the interview that I taped with Pisco yesterday. Adam, did you want to get to anything else before we played this? The interview was about an hour long, so we'll probably wrap after that's done.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've got a couple plugs I wanted to make sure to get in, and I think I'll just sit on my segment for now and give a couple plugs. Labor Notes does have some training. I wanted to make sure people were aware. If you missed the conference last month, we hated to miss you, but there is some online training happening in July. They have a stewards workshop, assertive grievance handling on July 15th. That's at 7 o'clock Central. And they have Secrets of a Successful Organizer online series is going to pick back up on July 29th, starting at 6:30. That's a multi-part series. You can go to labornotes.org/events to check that out. As always, really highly recommend you check out those trainings. We know that there are stewards who listen to this show, so definitely check out the Stewards Workshop. And if you are someone who's listening who has never been in a union, you've never been involved in organizing before, maybe you're not even thinking that's on your horizon, but you're involved in community organizing or political organizing, whatever it may look like, the Secrets of a Successful Organizer series can be really helpful for you. So again, labornotes.org/events. Check that out. And I guess, my final words will just be to say I really appreciated having both of our guests on today. It's the 4th of July. It's a good time to think about the state of our country, where we've been, where we're going. And in my opinion, this country has enormous potential if we can challenge the big money interests that dominate our political and economic life. And that's up to us. It's up to us as the labor movement and broadly the entire working class, because we are the majority and it's our labor that spins the wheels of this society in this country. And it's going to be up to us as everyday working people to come together and organize around our common interest and build a better country that can actually live up to its promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So appreciate all the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us. Looking forward to this interview Jacob's got taped. And I hope everyone has a safe holiday weekend.
All right. You sure you don't have anything else? You want to just sit on?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and play this interview with Pisco. We are joined now by Pisco Liddy, an attorney and political commentary. He does a stream here on YouTube called Pisco's Hour to talk about some of the recent Supreme Court rulings as well as some other law stuff. Pisco, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Thank you so much for having me, Jacob.
So, one of the Supreme Court cases that I've been following probably most closely is the overturning of Humphrey's executor. And because of its impact on labor law, we're a union radio program. And so, agencies like the National Labor Relations Board, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, the CFPB, which affects working people, those are topics that we cover all the time. We've had on people who work for those agencies. I actually had an NLRB attorney and president of the NLRB union, of his local NLRB union, a few months ago to talk about some of this stuff. And, so I'm like freaking out a little bit about Humphrey's executor being overturned. But for people who don't know Humphrey's executor, you would probably do a better job explaining it than I would. Can you, what was the precedent before it was overturned? And what is the law of the land now?
Yeah, no, it's really an important case. And Humphrey's executor was kind of like standout precedent for years and years that was taught in constitutional law that kind of defined how lawyers and certainly the country sees the executive power. So this case was all about executive power and basically the president's control or the extent of his control over the executive branch. In the Constitution, it vests executive power into a president, but that's not really elaborated that much. There's talks about the appointment power of a president. You have to go through all these steps, right? Get advice and consent, but there's no explicit conversation or mention of the removal authority. And so you had this case law that coming out of this case called Myers that initially set the president as having general removal authority. And Humphrey's executor was a case coming out of like the New Deal era. This is, by the way, one of the FTC commissioners appointed before Franklin Delano Roosevelt took over that FDR tried to fire because he wasn't really hanging with Roosevelt that much. And then he died. He wanted back pay. So his estate was the one that sued the government, right? That's why it's called Humphrey's executor. And out of that case law developed this notion that, well, there are some limits on executive removal authority. And those limits kind of relate to put it in a more simple way, certain independent agencies that were designed by Congress to have some insulation from presidential removal. And these are the kinds of areas where you wouldn't want to see a great deal of like executive interference, places where it makes sense to have either some sort of expert consensus or some bipartisan consensus. Think the FEC, right? When you're conducting elections or regulating elections, the FTC, which has a great deal of control, right, over problems related to consumer protection, things related to, for example, monopolies. And so a lot of these this trend towards expert-based bureaucrats, expert-based decision-making, that was something that was right at the heart of a lot of these New Deal regulations. And as an outgrowth of that, we started to see more agency that Congress would set up that way. And that case law developed over time, but it was always sort of one of the targets of the Federal Society and conservatives. There was a big famous dissent in one of the follow-on cases called Morrison v. Olson from Antonin Scalia. And Scalia, as you know, is like one of the big sort of seminal figures in the originalist movement. And so they've always had their eyes set out at Humphrey's executor for some doctrinal reasons that you could say if you're being like polite or if you're being, I don't know, if you want to give them a good grace. But there's also an anti-regulatory mood to a lot of what's motivating some of these jurists and some of these lawyers. And the upshot is this: the president is going to have a lot more control over quote unquote independent agencies. How that might affect, for example, unions and labor is whatever the character of your president, it makes the president choice a lot more important, right? Because if you have at bottom fundamentally anti-union, anti-labor president, they're going to be able to make the bureaucracy reflect that value a lot better.
Well, and not, I mean, and that happens a little bit already, but it's much more immediate, right? I mean, if the NLRB is entirely switched out
when a new president comes off. I mean, that's just, we already see a little bit of this whipsaw effect happening at the NLRB, and the idea that it's going to happen so quickly, I think, will be very difficult for working people and for their unions. The hook, my understanding, is that the hook that Congress has that they used to give themselves the ability to insulate federal agencies was that the Constitution gives them the power of the purse, spending power. And so the theory is, I am giving you the money to pay this NLRB member, the member of the National Labor Relations Board. I'm giving you the money to pay this person or the third. And so therefore it has to be spent in this way. And one of those conditions being that they have to be fired for cause if they're fired at all. They have to have some level of independence. And that strikes me as very, like how it strikes me as difficult to knock that down, because if Congress has the power of the purse, but they don't have the ability to put strings on the purse, how do they actually have the power of the purse? It would be my question.
Yeah, so you're talking a little bit about the rationale there. So really, the argument you're presenting is kind of a greater includes the lesser. Congress is able to create these agencies in the first place. They fund them. They have a great deal of control over what their mandate is. They pass their authorizing statutes. And so why couldn't it be within Congress's vision to insulate, say, an agency, say, for example, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors or First National Bank or an FTC? Why couldn't they just design the agency such that their mandate is one which prioritizes independence, especially when they have the power of the purse? And another sort of a related argument is, why do we take this view that the majority does in this case of a unitary executive, where they think that all these, this executive power is totally vested in one president, and you can't lend it out, you can't borrow it, there's no check on that authority from within the branch, when it's not clear from the text that that's the best reading. Congress already has authority when it comes to appointments. Congress, if it wants to, can deny advice and consent for principal officers of the United States. Congress, for inferior officers of the United States, are explicitly given the power to put the appointment power in the hands of just the courts if they wanted to. They could put it also to the heads of departments and to the president. So there's some textual basis to believe that Congress already has a great deal of control over how to set up the bureaucracies and the agencies, to say nothing of like the impeachment clause, right? The impeachment clause is a textually committed power to Congress that allows them to remove people. And you would think, right, with appointment comes removal. That's at least the argument from the majority, that appointment and removal were seen hand in hand. Well, if that's the case, Congress already has a great deal of control over appointment. So why does this removal thing follow? According to the majority, it's a take sort of at the broader purpose of the president under the Constitution. In other words, we wanted a vigorous executive. This might sound familiar for people who remember the argumentation on the immunity decision, right? They generally wanted a vigorous president, and the first Congress gave George Washington that authority, and further presidents ratified that decision, which obviously they would. And so therefore, let's just go with it. I'm kind of dumbing it down a little bit, but in general, their argument is one premised with this value at looking towards executive power and making sure that that executive power is untrammeled. So I buy the argument that if Congress can design agencies in the main, and they can get rid of these agencies, why can't they put these kinds of restrictions in place? I think that Congress these days has been far too limited in their usage of their own authority. And I think we need to get back to a place where we're not just, relying on a president to do everything.
And, that gets me to a question about the driving motivation behind the unitary executive theory at all, because, I grew up, I've spent my whole life in Alabama, just immersed in conservative politics. Basically everybody that I know is a Republican. And the thing that I heard growing up, you hear it less now, I think, but the thing that you hear growing up is the importance of limited government and the limitations on the government with respect to its ability to act, and so it feels sort of topsy-turvy that the Republicans are the ones arguing for a quote-unquote vigorous executive and an executive that has much more power. It would seem, if you're not
involved in the immediate politics of right now, that the more conservative, small c, position would be to decrease the power of the executive. But that's not the case. Why is that?
Yeah, I think that if you were trying to do a kind of realist analysis here, and that is one that I see you deploying, it's like, what makes sense? What is either a philosophical or an outcome-related through line, supposing that's consistent, right? Because that's another thing to consider, is maybe the conservatives are inconsistent. But assuming that they're being consistent, what's a through line here? I think one through line is ideological in this. If you believe in the formalism of their opinion, they're always trying to have these hermetically sealed and like bright line rules for everything. That is very much how their mind and judicial philosophy works. For other people, though, and what I suspect, because there's part of this that has gone unsaid so far, though I've alluded to it, is that there's an anti-regulatory and pro-business view of this court. And this is what I mean by that. Take the decision regarding overturning of the Chevron doctrine. I'm sure that has, to the extent that you guys have any dealing with the agencies, that's affected a lot of things, or it may portend later in the road, sort of affecting aspects of compliance, aspect of like, federal employees, that kind of stuff. You take that decision, you take the decision now, right, in terms of limiting the ability for agencies themselves to be protected from a president who is anti-regulatory in their mood. And that explains their decision-making, in my view. They're trying to take the decisions out of the hands of bureaucrats that they disagree with, or that's almost a term that they use as a pejorative, bureaucrat, but out of the hands of experts, and put them in the hands of people who, in general, are sort of suspicious of regulatory impulses. And that is this court, and that is the current conservative alleged president. So I think that makes sense of things, and it also makes sense of the exception that they've carved in this rule of overturning Humphrey's executor. And that conspicuous exception is the Federal Reserve that I want to talk about a little bit.
Yes, please do, because, as you said, it's a very conspicuous exception. The president has the authority to replace any executive administrator at all, except for the Federal Reserve, and that seems very difficult to parse. It seems like you'd either have to have it one way or another. There can be independent agencies, or there cannot be. But here, they have their cake and they're eating it too. How are they doing that?
Yeah, so we already knew, by the way, that Humphrey's executor was going to be overturned because there was a direct case on the NLRB that went through the shadow docket process prior to this case being sort of unfurled. And we already had the inclination that as part of the Project 2025 agenda, they were going to set up this ultimate conflict with the courts and to overturn Humphrey's executor. But we also knew from the shadow docket that they were willing to keep in place Lisa Cook, who is a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors that Trump wanted to get rid of off of this like pretense regarding, I don't know, mortgage. What is it that they're always accusing people that they don't like
mortgage fraud
of doing when they want to get rid of them? I think it's like mortgage fraud. Yeah. And so this was sort of percolating for a little bit. The Academy understood that the direction the court was going to take is basically everything except for the Federal Reserve is going to have this insulation, or is not going to have insulation. And the question is why? What is the principle that unifies the Federal Reserve exception and that sort of dispenses with the rest? The court gives very little for us to sort of glean from a truly theoretical basis for why it is that they're different, other than to vaguely gesture, well, there was a first national bank of the United States, there was a second national bank of the United States around the founding, ignoring the fact that those were highly controversial at the time. There were many people, including James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who thought that they were unconstitutional, excluding the fact that the first and second national bank did very different things than the Federal Reserve, and not explaining why. Why is it the case that, well, because there's a distinct history of the Federal Reserve, let's even assume and grant that, does that every agency has a distinct history? I mean, you can point to a distinct history, but so there's no explanation other than a reference to those that first and second national bank, but nothing really approximating something theoretical or grounded or doctrinal. The actual case involving Lisa Cook, in that situation, it was more of a case regarding whether or not Trump actually had cause to fire Lisa Cook, because the government conceded that it wasn't fit into this category. But you'll notice Clarence Thomas and Amy Coney Barrett, in their dissents in those cases, they call out the fact that the court is being inconsistent in their approach with the Federal Reserve vis-a-vis what they did with the FTC. And so that's the best I'm going to be able to give you. They look at the First and Second National Bank. They say there's a distinct history there that no one's ever questioned. In the actual case, I guess they didn't question it, and they decided that, there have to be some procedural guardrails before you fire a Federal Reserve governor. But, it's not much in the way of convincing.
It really feels like, even though even if we accept that, there's a history with the Federal Reserve, why would it be that history would only be linked to the Federal Reserve and not that, Congress in its first iterations, was happy for there to be the existence of some independent agencies, and it created other agencies that were not independent, that it said were not independent. And so therefore, they think it's fine. If Congress wants to do that, then it can. And we have history dating back to before the founding of the country.
Yeah, you're actually like, why is there a necessary conclusion that this was the one exception, especially since we don't have explicit writings from the framer saying, oh yeah, and we consider the First National Bank different on this view of executive power. There is no necessary connection there. They could have, if they wanted to, make a kind of argument, well, the Federal Reserve System is kind of this hybrid, it's private public, and so we're going to treat it differently. But here's the problem. If anything that's sort of based in a value or a principle, you could imagine a future government or a future Congress being very sneaky and smart and just remaking everything to kind of be set up like the Federal Reserve Board. And so generalizing it, in other words, making a principle that is sort of like a blueprint for how you create independent agencies in the future. They could just recreate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that way. They could recreate the FTC that way. And so it needs to be a sui generis. But what I mean is an example of one, a rule for one. Now, as to the history there was a vigorous debate about whether the president has removal authority in the first Congress. And that was decided by the first Congress to be that they did. But that's just a statute, right? There's no necessary conclusion from that statute that the Constitution needs to be read that way. And there are a great deal of statutes, or I should say there have been statutes from the first Congress that have been overturned as unconstitutional. We were interpreting the first Judiciary Act for the CASA decision that will relate to birthright citizenship that we'll talk about later on. And, that was interpreting an aspect of the Judiciary Act, and there have been other, acts around that time that have been struck down. So there's nothing, Don Adams famously made it a crime to criticize the president. So just because something was done by the framers, it's really good evidence, but I don't think that it's a necessary conclusion that the way they thought about the removal authority is binding on us now as a constitutional matter, especially when they themselves disagreed so vigorously about it, both principally and as applied in the First National Bank.
Well, so when you say that they ended up saying in statute that the president has removal authority, what were there debates about is it constitutional that the president has removal authority or doesn't? Were the debates about whether or not this is a constitutional question, or were the debates more around efficacy and a prudential decision? It makes sense for this statute that we are promulgating right now. Was it a constitutional debate or was it a prudential debate?
Yeah, there were different views. So one camp, and the majority opinion does talk about this. One group thought that it was just already decided, that it was a matter of just what the Constitution said. Others said that it lied with Congress just because of the symmetry there, right? Congress has the power of advice and consent, and so it would make sense for Congress also to have to approve any kind of removal. And then a third group thought it was prudential, and that it's just whatever we decide the rule ought to be. Now, ultimately, Washington, who, a lot of the presidency is modeled on Washington, and who was respected by the politicians of the day, completely different time, by the way, than it is now. That decision was ultimately made as a congressional matter, as a statute matter, but it's only, I think, in the mind of the majority, a necessary reading that we're bound by that forever into the future. And into the 19th century, we started to see agencies, and really the big explosion of growth in the 20th century that reflected a different choice from Congress.
Yeah, really concerned about what it's going to mean. The labor law in this country has already
deteriorated significantly. I'm not sure how closely you follow Matt Brunig, but he has a really great publication called NLRB Edge, where he's talked about even under the Biden administration, if you look at how long it takes for labor law cases to get resolved, it easily gets into the 3 to 4 years. And, there's one at the Bessemer Amazon union election in Alabama that was in 2022 or is still not resolved. And there are still questions about, and so, I don't know. It's going to be really bad, I think. So
it affects everything, and it will definitely affect the control that Trump has and any president has in the future over federal employees, but also just things related to corruption. If this is true, then we can't make an independent counsel statute again. Then presumptively everything that happened with the Morrison v. Olson decision, that was an independent counsel at issue. That was unconstitutional. So it really does affect many aspects of our life when it comes to a powers question. But there's one little thing, last thing I want to sort of bring your attention to, which is a concurrence from Neil Gorsuch. Neil Gorsuch buys the majority's argument, but then says the dissent has a good point that these agencies weren't intended to be non-independent. And maybe that indicates, perhaps, so says Neil Gorsuch, that the court has some work to do to invalidate those agencies, to take away those statutes of Congress, because, of course, Congress only granted them rulemaking authority, substantial substantive authority, on the condition with the proviso that they would have independence. And absent that proviso, maybe it's a good idea for the court, says Neil Gorsuch, to resurrect some of these judicial doctrines, doctrines like the non-delegation principle, the major questions doctrine. And we got to start putting these to work for overturning these entire regimes and the entire regulatory state. And so that I think you can expect in the future, a more left-wing president probably is not going to have the same amount of deference from the court, and maybe might be looking at even more profound injuries to the current sort of regulatory state as it is.
Well, and this is probably, I don't know if it makes more sense to have this part of the conversation later on, but I think that especially when you start talking about the idea that, the Supreme Court is just going to say that our entire labor relations regime of the last 100 years is unconstitutional, even though it's been upheld time after time. We're going to get rid of the NLRB. We're going to get rid of the CFPB. We're going to get the idea that could happen, such radical changes to the way that the American government is operated. But, as you said, basically on the behalf of business interests and the wealthy elite, I think you start it forces people like us to start talking about things like court packing, I think.
100%. I've been a big proponent of court expansion. I encourage people who, if you hear this and you want to follow my channel, we have, by we, I mean me and my friend Josiah from Pondering Politics. He runs a big YouTube channel. We've had multiple debates about this, and there are many different ways to get to the conclusion that court expansion is necessary. One is from a self-defense rationale with what they did with Merrick Garland's seats. And, Mitch McConnell, we're not really hearing from him right now, but what he did, in our view, is worse than legislative court expansion, because with legislative court expansion, at a bare minimum, there's some democratic legitimacy. Both houses of Congress need to have the same language passed. The president has to sign it, subject to judicial review. What Mitch McConnell did was also a norm violation, but didn't have any of those virtues, and he basically was able to stack the court. So there's that rationale, but there's policy rationales that you just referenced. If you ever want to get to a place where the relations between labor and private capital, as well as, frankly, the government as a public employee, are in any good situation, you're going to need to have a robust majority on the Supreme Court that's willing to stand up for those principles and for those agencies. Look no further than the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have their eyes, they're watering at just gutting that, as to the extent that they haven't already, with just the executive stuff. And so all of that is on the table for this conservative court. And you really need to get into our heads as advocates that step one needs to be judicial reform. And until you do that, you're not going to be able to get the legislative accomplishments or regulatory accomplishments that you want.
Elie Mystal at The Nation wants to expand the court to 29 justices. Have you seen his arguments for that?
I haven't seen his arguments for that. I'll say the most I'm willing to commit to is 13, because I do think that it's important to have some amount of proportionality, I think, to the injury that was done previously. And so that's Ro Khanna's plan, I think, something like 13.
Right.
And I would be interested, though, in his arguments. I know he's also a big fan of court expansion, but even putting aside the partisan aspect of it and putting aside the results-oriented aspect about it, and even just the self-defense aspect of it, as just a matter of prudence, as a matter of logistics and just the workings of the court, we don't have enough justices on the Supreme Court. We don't have enough judges in the intermediate and district court level. You talked about delays in terms of the NLRB cases. I mean, the delays in federal cases, it's ridiculous. And so just as a workload matter, we should be interested in even just bipartisan increase in the number of justices and judges. But there needs to be some accounting for what was done with the courts under Republican presidents and under Mitch McConnell's leadership. And that's why I think that Democrats should be leading the charge on court expansion.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking to just the ability of the government to do the things that it was meant to do, I mean, the entirety of the government basically, is underfunded and understaffed. I mean, you look at OSHA. OSHA has, and it's crazy to say, but OSHA has something like half of the inspectors that it had under Reagan. And that was in Biden's final year. There are obviously many more people in the country, many more workplaces in the country, many more workers in the country than there were under Ronald Reagan. It would take 200 years for OSHA inspectors to visit every workplace in the country. And so because of that, OSHA is now talking to people who work at OSHA and who are members of AFGE, the union that represents most OSHA workers. They are now unable to do much at all proactive stuff. They are only able to go after employers once they have killed somebody, which happens all the time. And it's totally. But then you mentioned the overturning of the NLRA and the dissolution of the NLRB. I think that there are some people on the left that get a little bit triumphalist about that, saying things like, the bosses are going to find out why the NLRA was passed. And there's a little bit of truth to that, because before the NLRA was passed, before there was a standardized regime of labor law in the country, their labor disputes were much more violent on both sides. People died in strikes. People were hurt, damaged, and attacked and killed during strikes. Mostly, and the reason that I say it's a little bit triumphalist is because most of the deaths were on the side of the workers. It was typically, federal guards or company-hired thugs that were shooting and killing unionists. Did happen occasionally on the other side, not nearly as often. But it was genuinely part of the reason for the NLRA was to say that, well, it's better if we don't kill each other, actually. It's better if we can kind of sit at a table and negotiate and have a civilized regime for labor relations. And I do worry about, getting back to a, 19th, early 20th century version of labor relations, especially when there are already so many other, similarities between now and then, the highest level of wealth inequality since the Gilded Age. Just lots of similarities between this time and now. And I would be very concerned about, if the NLRA were overturned, that we start to see more similarities.
It's funny you mentioned Ronald Reagan, noted communist Ronald Reagan. I don't know. At some point, we'll get to the birthright citizenship case because he had some quotes at the end of his administration, which, if you were to say them now, you'd be confused for, I don't know, a member of the DSA or someone on the far left, according to MAGA. But you raise a really good point here, which is a lot of these different regimes, these agencies, come out of a distinct history where some horrible stuff happened, and that's why that agency was put into place. We're going to talk about campaign finance related lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court as well. Those kinds of contribution limits, and those came as a result of outright corruption by Nixon and others in the 70s and prior to that. So yeah, a lot of these, when you start just breaking things, which this conservative court is wont to do, you forget about the pain, suffering, criminality, violence that got you to where you are. Another example of this is the Voting Rights Act, which was also essentially gutted in the Calais decision. This was a triumph, really a triumph of decades and decades and decades of, and more, really, centuries of either formal slavery and second-class citizenship status after slavery was abolished. And we forget about all that because it's in the past, because it's in history books. But it's a good point to bring up because we don't want to go back to those days.
Right. Well, and you mentioned, the conservative Supreme Court just breaking things. Again, not a very conservative thing to do. I don't know how much you followed Jordan Peterson's kind of rise and fall, but one of the things that he talked about, at least in the beginning before, whatever happened in his brain completely melted, was, the value of conservatism is that a conservative looks at a fence and thinks, somebody must have put that there for a reason. I wonder why. Let me investigate it before I tear it down, right? And the good thing about progressivism, that sort of, psychological, way of being is that, people want to tear down things that are not working optimally. And maybe, the con of that is that you don't have enough respect for the way that things are and the way that things kind of came into being. And you don't have enough respect for people who passed those, who created those institutions in the past. And so it's it's very conservative, or it's very funny that we have conservatives in many ways acting less like conservatives and more like counter revolutionaries.
It's a good observation. I just wanted to real quick mention I do sometimes feel like a conservative. I'll put my cards on the table. I'm a proud Democrat, but sometimes I do feel like a conservative. So maybe the triumphalism that you're seeing for people on the farther left is related to that because they want to see a fundamental change in the order. I just think that the kind of changes that you're going to want to see as a day-to-day person can be achieved within the Democratic Party, within the broader left. And you're seeing a lot of that feeling, right, among Democrats now that want to see more fight from their politicians and even some major wins against 30-year incumbents in places like Colorado and incumbents in New York. And so I would just say there are ways to get to where we need to go within that framework. And if you want to see more wins, we need to start by reforming this court.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of those wins, we had on the assistant director for UAW Region 9A in New England and in New York, and the UAW was really crucial to those victories in New York. Was I think one of the only unions that endorsed those three candidates, and two of those three were actually UAW members, Claire Valdez and Chevalier. So it was fun getting to talk to one of the leaders of the union behind those victories. But you mentioned the campaign finance decision, and I wanted to talk. I wanted to talk to you about this because of it's like my kind of general position on that is that it's probably bad because the idea that we would have less restrictions on campaign finance just that immediately strikes me as bad. But the thought that I had after that is that the way that I'm reading the news coverage of this and what little I've read of the decision and the background is that now the parties can act sort of as super PACs that are able to coordinate with the candidates, and that seems to be like the biggest expected result of the decision. But I remember, seeing Colbert talking about super PACs and really exposing how thin that line really is, and the implication of a lot of his kind of activism around that was that there's not really a line that super PACs can really kind of basically coordinate already. And so does this specific rollback, is it actually going to have is it actually going to have big implications is my question.
Yeah, so on the question of implications, I think that there's already so much money in politics from outside groups, and the court goes out of its way to note that too, that the money from spending from outside groups and from the so-called super PACs dwarfs now political parties. Although it's kind of funny in the dissent, Kagan points out, well, that's obvious because of Citizens United and because of your decisions regarding the current super PAC doctrine. And so one of the things that they claim that justifies their decision in overturning another precedent, by the way, you'll see a theme of that in this recent court of overturning prior precedent. There was a decision that was from like the early 2000s that squarely dealt with this issue, which I'll explain in a second, that they're overturning. But one of the justifications was this will even the score. Now we'll get more political party spending But the only reason that the outside group spending dwarfs it is because of the court's own decisions. You said this allows the political party to act like a super PAC of the candidate. I would say it more allows them to act like the checking account of the candidate. I mean, this is not for independent expenditures. This is for coordinated expenditures. This is saying that through a kind of artful set of donations and through an artful scheme of funneling money within the party, you're able to significantly increase the amount of you're donating to a candidate indirectly than otherwise you would be under the contribution limits, the individual or corporate contribution limits. Actually, I don't even think you're allowed as a corporation to directly contribute to candidates. And so what is this letting you do? It's basically saying that as long as you give money to the party where the limit is much, much higher, and as long as they don't like explicitly say we're earmarking this for the candidate specifically, then who knows what's going on behind the party doors. And if the party just so happens to choose to spend that money in coordination with the candidate and through their own grace, maybe they take some money off the top, then what are we to do about that? So the long and short of it is as follows. The Supreme Court overturned a prior precedent that said, hey, these contribution limits mean something, and we don't want to just let people get around the contribution limits by just going through the party. But that's essentially what the court is letting happen with much, much higher limits on the political party donation front than on the contribution specifically to the campaign. We can talk about the First Amendment implications of that if you want, but that's sort of like the big picture.
I got you. Yeah, I mean, the First Amendment implications, I don't know. The idea that money is speech is never been like even a little bit convincing to me. I was talking to to Dale Jackson, the host on one of the stations that we were on about this, and he was like, oh, well, the First Amendment, and it's like, so what? You're telling me that, prior to Citizens United, we were in, some like a communist hellhole where you couldn't speak your mind. I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous. I mean, I don't know, but I suppose, what are the First Amendment implications about this in your mind?
Yeah. So like, I go back and forth sometimes on how much I think expenditures constitute speech, because I think that everyone would have a line where they're like, you can't just get towards banning speech by like banning spending money on something, right? So like there is a line I think that people will draw on how close that connection.
I think I could get behind basically, like public financing of elections, and nobody gets to spend their own personal money, and you could do like democracy vouchers like they have in New York or something like that, where maybe you can donate $1 and you get it matched by the public financing up to $8, and so maybe the max spending that you can do is like $100 or $200. But even outside, even without you spending any money, I could say that okay, well, you have instead of you getting to spend personal money, every citizen gets a budget from the government of $100 or $200 or $300 or $1,000 or however much for each election, and you don't get to spend any personal. I don't think that would be a big infringement on speech
from like a campaign finance perspective. That might be like a smart play, but I'm just saying on the principle of the First Amendment. If the government passed a law that said it shall be illegal to spend more than $100 on books, you would think that that's an imposition, even though the regulation is tailored towards spending. If it's a way to get towards like crucial speech, now maybe there's a really good reason in the context of campaign finance law, and the First Amendment has a bunch of exceptions and this thing called strict scrutiny when you get like a really good purpose and it's narrowly tailored. And so all I'm trying to say is there is some spending that I think we could say is sufficiently linked to speech such that we would consider it either the purpose to try to stifle speech or to chill speech or whatever. But here's what everyone agrees on, regardless of where your line is there. Everyone on the court agrees that direct contributions, given the appearance for quid pro quo corruption or actual quid pro quo corruption, that whatever you want to say about spending and speech, that is able to be regulated by the government. That is to say, you're able to put limits on how much people are directly paying to politicians for their political campaigns with respect to the appearance or actual existence of quid pro quo corruption. And so given that sort of starting assumption that both sides, the majority and dissent, agree with, the only question here is whether or not letting the candidates run the political parties, letting them use the political parties as like a checking account, whether that makes a mockery of the contribution limits that currently exist. And so really, when you ask what are the First Amendment implications here, I don't think that there are any, really, because this is about whether or not we agree that the political party situation is for the purpose of the quid pro quo corruption rationale that everyone already buys into on the Supreme Court. And I don't think this is going to make any like a sort of additional speech that's valuable for the country. I think we're just going to see greater funneling of money and revenues towards candidates, and it's going to benefit, in my mind, disproportionately the Republicans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you've seen in the New York Times, I think it was, their analysis of recent spending in the elections. It was like 20% of all federal campaign spending was done by like 40 billionaires and their family members. And, 30 years ago, the number, the amount of campaign spending on federal elections that was done by billionaires was like 0.3%. I mean, it's just gotten so out of hand. And I saw, and I can't remember if this was in a Supreme Court opinion or a dissent or something, but like a third of all federal spending ever has been done during this primary cycle. Something crazy like that. It might be more. It might be more after this court case. If you go to footnote 6 in the majority opinion, and Kagan calls this out as well, they say, today we don't decide whether or not this logic applies to outside groups with their independent expenditures, in that they can now coordinate with the candidates themselves. And that would like destroy any, like you said, that there's like no even the thinnest pretense of non-coordination currently with the super PACs. They would just remove all of that. Now, they didn't decide that in this case, but they also didn't like highly denounce it. And the dissent, I think, is right to point attention to that footnote, the fact that it's almost a portent for what might be coming down the line, not too dissimilar to what they did with the Voting Rights Act. They will often sort of leave breadcrumbs. Clarence Thomas especially, you'll see in the majority opinion how often they're citing his dissent in previous cases. They will leave little breadcrumbs for litigants, usually Republican litigant groups and high-octane lawyers, to follow and to bring the law to where they want it to go. The court decided a couple of immigration cases as well that I wanted to talk about. And, unions have come out pretty strongly opposing, particularly the TPS decision. I want to read from a couple of union statements about this. This is from the Laborers International Union of North America. The Laborers Union, for those of you who don't know, they're the people who represent on construction sites laborers, like, the hands, the kind of lowest, quote unquote. I mean, there's not in a lot of times like apprenticeship programs for, you can just kind of go and be a laborer. And so they represent a lot of, in the construction industry, a lot of lower paid and a lot of immigrant workers. Some like 600, 700,000. The General President Booker said for decades, TPS recipients have followed the law, worked hard, paid taxes, raised families, and helped build America. Many are proud LIUNA members whose skill and dedication are indispensable to our industry. Removing these trained and experienced members will weaken our workforce, harm local communities, separate families, and force many people back to countries where they face violence, persecution, or worse. And I want to mention that, in Haiti, it's as dangerous as it's ever been. Back to their statement, they said Congress must finally do its job. Temporary protections are no substitute for permanent solutions. Congress has the constitutional authority to pass immigration reform that provides a permanent pathway to citizenship for the workers who have earned the right to remain in the country they helped build. The International Union of Painters and Allied Trades also had a statement condemning the resolution. The Painters Union has really distinguished themselves as the most progressive of the building trades unions. And so it's not going to come as a surprise to listeners of our program that they, were very strong in their defense of workers here on TPS. They said, we have long supported bolstering rights, including a path to citizenship for TPS recipients. TPS recipients and other immigrant workers have built up our American economy, and it is wrong to pull the rug out from underneath them. That's again from General President Jimmy Williams of IUPAT. How did the Supreme Court come to the decision that it did on TPS?
Yeah, so the rationale is that there's part of the law specifically that makes certain determinations unreviewable by the courts. In other words, it's called a jurisdiction stripping provision of the law. And that jurisdiction stripping provision can be read incredibly broadly or incredibly narrowly. And in my view, the majority reads it incredibly broadly to essentially mean that anything related to a determination as to the country conditions in one of these, in any place that was initially designated as a place for TPS. And to understand what TPS is, it's a grant of temporary status in the country for people who were in the country while the designation was made. So it doesn't apply to you just like if you were to come from Haiti now to try to get into the country, even if the TPS designation were still in place, you wouldn't be able to get TPS. It's when you were in the country when the designation was made, but you could like sort of redesignate if you wanted to, and Biden did do that. They have said that this jurisdiction stripping provision applies to everything. And even though Congress very carefully said, listen, these are the procedures you need to go through before you make a determination. Like you have to consult with relevant agencies and experts before you actually come to determination for good reason. Because as you said, right, Haiti is still like in the red zone for all of our State Department sort of diagnoses in terms of the country conditions. It's not safe in Haiti, right? And Syria currently has problems also, obviously, after they just had a brutal civil war that even the conservatives are talking about. And so those kinds of reasons, Congress took time and deliberation to put in those procedures in place. And what the majority says is, even if it was so obvious that what was going on in the administration was illegal, that they're designating in complete flouting of the law, they never do any of the procedures that Congress mandates, we're not able to review any of it. The more sensible, I think, conclusion is the jurisdiction stripping provision is just for the ultimate determination. You can't sort of replace the ultimate determination, but you can still check whether or not the procedural steps were complied with. That's all what the courts wanted to do here, is to make sure that you were actually running a process by which people were consulting with each other. And that makes a lot of sense because think about it. Can you imagine this administration, maybe you can, coming out and saying, actually what's going on in Haiti, it's actually very safe. You know, part of the reason why some of these people get like wring their hands a lot about why Democrats care so much about procedure, getting people to write down on a piece of paper what the reasons are for a decision. The same thing for the for-cause removal things that we just talked about. The same thing in the labor context. Just getting someone to give an official reason why you were fired, why this or that, has a way of chilling and getting in sort of enforcing compliance, even if not perfectly. There are some more sinister things at issue, though, in this decision that I want to talk about. But that's the sort of long and short of it. The court decided that Congress had deprived the courts of their own jurisdiction to hear the case.
Well, and you mentioned the more sinister things, and I think what you're referring to there is one of the arguments. My understanding is that the decision to strip TPS status for Haitians and Syrians was motivated in part by racism. And my understanding of the law is that even if a thing itself would be legal, doing a legal thing because of racism and discrimination is illegal. Like doing the racism is not legal, and so you can turn legal things into something that is not legal, right? And so maybe explain that for the audience a little bit better than I did, and how the Supreme Court responded to that.
No, it's not anything of like a problem of your analysis that it's hard to put it into words, is because I think the court's theories here make no sense. Because on the one hand, they want to say that all of these decisions are committed to the discretion, for example, of the president. And yet we know that there are things that the president isn't allowed to do under the Constitution, notwithstanding the fact that the president may have some default removal authority. We know that the Constitution prevents you from establishing a religion and firing someone, let's say, because they're Jewish, or firing someone because they're Christian. That's the First Amendment at play. Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Well, what's really important there? You can't discriminate on the basis of religion when it comes to firing decisions. Likewise, right? If there was a given executive policy motivated by racial animus, you would think, and it has been the doctrine of the Supreme Court of the United States, that such a decision is anathema to the Constitution. We just had the affirmative action case, right, where they said affirmative action is racist and it can't happen, where they said the VRA embraces, as currently understood, racial gerrymanders, and so they had to adjust it to not allow for racial discrimination. But when it comes to immigration, the court is deploying an immigration exceptionalist framework. And that immigration exceptionalist framework essentially says, or sort of implies, that when it comes to immigration decisions, there, racism is going to be treated with a much lower standard. Think about the Trump versus Hawaii decision. This is from the quote-unquote Muslim ban from 2018. There, the normal rules of construction or substantive rules regarding equal protection or sort of dictate that you have to look at the statements to see whether or not this indicates racial animus. And then if they do, you apply like this very strict test to whatever action was taken. But there, they kind of flip the burden on its head and they say, well, because it relates to immigration and national security, we're just going to start at the lowest test or one of the lowest tests. And that is basically how the court has approached this. They're in the game of committing things to executive discretion, of even removing jurisdiction to hear claims involving discrimination, etc., from immigration. And for Clarence Thomas specifically, in his concurrence, he said that there might not even be any equal protection principle that applies to the federal government. He says that, in contradiction to storied precedent of the Supreme Court, again, this is something that's consistent in a pattern, he says that he would sooner say that there is no federal equal protection principle, and that certainly none that apply to quote-unquote aliens. And so these are kind of in my view, some of the sinister forces, the ones that are sort of indicating that the courts really aren't going to be in the business of policing government racism when it benefits conservatives, and Clarence Thomas outright saying, listen, equal protection for the federal government, that's like a myth, and it's especially a myth as to non-citizens.
Wow. And the last Supreme Court case that I wanted to talk to you about was the birthright citizenship case. And, I guess my thoughts on that one, the Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship. But funny enough, I thought that J.D. Vance had the most sort of accurate take from that, which is that they are one Supreme Court justice away from eliminating birthright citizenship. And so this, even though, the ruling itself was a win, quote unquote, if, you believe in birthright citizenship, the thing that the country has had since Reconstruction, when, I think that it's very easy to argue that the country really went through a second founding at the end of the Civil War. And so since the second founding of the country, it's still very scary, and just another reason that we should really be talking about whether the Supreme Court as it exists is something that's legitimate or should be, really reformed and changed in a huge way. But what do you make of that? I mean, yeah. Does this decision sort of mollify you, or does it, agitate you more?
Not in the slightest. So first of all, the decision itself is wonderful, and I am a humongous critic of John Roberts. I think that he is by far one of the most unprincipled jurists on the court, and I think that he's really been a shame in his job of managing the court's affairs. But that said, the opinion is wonderful. But the opinion really is just a restatement of a principle that was already well known to this country, and that was iterated in Wong Kim Ark, this decision from the 19th century. And the fact that we are now in a situation where on the constitutional result here, the important constitutional result that is a direct outgrowth of the second founding, as you put it, that we're 5-4 is a disgrace. The arguments on the other side are laughable. Just putting on an originalist hat, there is so much evidence that suggests that the birthright citizenship clause was embracing the English common law rule of birthright citizenship, and that essentially it didn't matter whether or not you were here legally or not, or whether you were a temporary sojourner, that when you were born and subject to the king's laws, they were importing the rules of subjecthood of the king from England, right? You are given you have temporary allegiance to the king, and that implies temporary protection from the king, and that implies jurisdiction. And the words are right there. If you're born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, you are a citizen of the United States. And so this was a very straightforward decision, and applying an originalist perspective, it was obvious what the result was. This was considered a fringe view, the dissenters and their various different dissents, for the longest time. But the fact that the Trump appointed judges, save for Amy Coney Barrett, bought on some aspect of that theory, and really the dissenters kind of disagree with each other, and they're a mess. But the fact that you got 4 votes to undo that, I think it shows that the court's in big trouble.
Yeah. Pisco, really appreciate your time. You've been very generous with it. I've got one more question for you, this one outside of the Supreme Court. The Trump administration is attempting to promulgate a new rule for federal employees that would require, as a condition of employment, NDAs. And, federal unions, IFPTE, AFGE, and presumably the others have come out in opposition to it, saying that this would, in part, serve to hide, funny enough, they use the words, this administration's waste, fraud, and abuse, but other, misdoings of the administration. It would further hide that from the public. And I think that, one of the things that I think is probably motivating the administration to do this is the way that federal employees have really been at the front of the fight against the Trump administration. You look at the Federal Unionists Network and the federal unions themselves and how they have been fighting the Trump administration and how the administration has been fighting against them. I'm thinking in particular of Ellen May, the president of an NTEU local at the, in the food stamps program at the USDA. She gave an interview to MSNBC, didn't even mention Trump, did not even say Trump's name, did not advocate in favor of or against a law, did not even, you could read that interview as, you could have read that interview as an attack on Democrats for not, acceding to the president's demands, because all she talked about was the impact that food stamps going away would have on the people that she serves. And they attempted to fire her. They placed her on administrative leave for something like 6 months. She only recently, like a couple of weeks ago, got her job back. That's probably the most egregious of the attempts to fire federal employees who were speaking out against the administration. But it is one of many. And I think that this NDA is an attempt to really clamp down on federal workers, servants of the American people, being able to talk to the American people about what they do for them and how their ability to serve is being impacted by this administration. But, what do you make of the rule that OPM is trying to promulgate? Do you think that it is going to be struck down by this court that cares about the Constitution so much? Or do you think that they're going to be able to find a way to say that this does not somehow violate the First Amendment rights of federal employees?
Yeah, big tension, because let's start with the policy. You are right to point out all the different ways in which the administration is attacking the employees, and really where the federal bureaucracy, the agencies, and government employees are in the crosshairs of a lot of what they're doing with Russ Vought. The initial stages, a lot of the firings that were going on, the reclassification or the attempted reclassification of employees to be more amenable to direct firing and not being like under the civil service code and stuff like that. And so this is a whole of government effort to get everyone on message. And the one thing that they care most about is their like public social media accounts and making sure that everyone is sort of not speaking out in turn against the administration. That's what they hate the most. But there's some tension here, because on the one hand, again, taking a formalist perspective, the court has made overtures to the First Amendment a lot and have sort of claimed the mantle of reinvigorating the First Amendment. And there is case law, all the like very, very important case law, this case called Pickering and others, that establishes that public employees have a right to speak out on issues of public concern. There's limits to that right, but in general, this is a right that all public employees have, right? When the government acts as an employer, it is limited in how it can curtail and do viewpoint discrimination. But then there's the executive sort of deference that this court has long time now in decisions related to, as we talked about, the Trump immunity decision, the Humphreys executor case, where they have deferred to executive decisions on employment and on firing. So given those two sort of tensions, I think the court is, there's not like on point precedent on NDAs specifically, but if I had to guess, I think that they're going to be more adherent to their roots vis-a-vis Humphreys executor than they are on Pickering. So there are other ways in which this might violate statutes of Congress. So for example, there might be some limitations to the extent that the NDAs conflict with whistleblower protections. There are statutes on the books that say, hey, you can't give an NDA as the government that prevents them from talking to inspectors general or prevents them from talking to Congress or filing whistleblower reports. So there's some limits there. There are also some limits with respect, presumably, right, with labor agreements and labor statutes. So that's going to be worked out in the courts. But if it comes down to the ultimate constitutional principle, I don't trust this court to uphold First Amendment rights of federal employees over the executive discretion of the alleged president.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned whistleblower protections. I mean, another group of federal employees who have been fired were people who filed whistleblower reports at the Department of Housing and Urban Development with and spoke with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and for that they have been, at this point, I think they're still on administrative leave. They haven't been given their jobs back yet, but I also don't think that they've been, like permanently fired. I think their case is still working through the system. But yeah, I mean, the idea that even absent this rule, the administration is willing to try to fire people for talking to senators is nuts. And I don't see how.
I mean, they're in good company because Jared Polis, the Democratic governor of Colorado, just recently fired members of his own clemency board because they spoke out and said that they twice had recommended against giving clemency or any kind of contrition whatsoever to Tina Peters. I take your point. It's madness, and I just would sooner, see the administration change hands.
Pisco, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd want to leave us with before we let you go?
No, it was a pleasure talking to you guys. If you could, I encourage you to watch the Supreme Court expansion debates that I'm having with Josiah from Pondering Politics. It's all good stuff. And this is something that we're trying to push to different places. We've talked to politicians. We're talking to big influencers like Brian Tyler Cohen, Kyle Kulinski, Mehdi Hassan, and they have even cited, in the case of Kyle Kulinski and Mehdi Hassan, they have cited our work, our arguments in sort of their change in views, or at least their change in priority, I would say, on court expansion. We're going to do something with Brian Tyler Cohen in the future. This is something that everyone from left-wing perspective should be on board with. And so we're strongly in favor of that. And I encourage you to follow our channels, Pisco Liddy and Pondering Politics. And I really appreciate the time to talk about the court.
All right. Appreciate it. And folks, do check it out. I've seen at least 2 of the debates that you've done, as mind-numbing as some of your opponents can be. But
yeah,
appreciate your time.
Appreciate you.